You are standing at the edge of a clearing, watching the last sliver of daylight disappear behind a wall of dark pines. The sky above you has turned the color of brushed steel, and the cold is settling in with the kind of certainty that cannot be argued with or turned away. It comes from the north, from distances you cannot measure, carrying with it the weight of an entire continent of ice. You feel it first on your face, then in your fingertips, and finally deep in your chest where each breath becomes visible, a small ghost that rises and vanishes in the descending twilight. This is Siberia, in the middle years of the 19th century, and you are a serf. The word itself carries a weight that has nothing to do with language and everything to do with generations. You belong to someone else, as did your father, and his father before him. Your labor, your movement, your very existence is tethered to land you do not own and to a master whose name you speak with the same reflexive deference you might offer to weather or to fate. But here, in this moment, as darkness gathers around the small village where you live, the abstractions of bondage give way to something far more immediate, the need to survive the coming night. The village is small, perhaps 40 souls in all, clustered in a handful of low wooden structures that seem to crouch against the earth as if seeking shelter from the sky itself. There are no grand buildings here, no stone churches or manor houses. Those belong to other places, to the distant towns where governors and merchants conduct their affairs in heated rooms. Here, there is only wood, thick logs notched and fitted together, chinked with moss and clay, covered with roofs of layered birch bark and sod. The structures are dark with age and smoke, their surfaces worn smooth by wind and countless hands. They look as though they have grown from the ground rather than been built upon it. You have lived in this village all your life. You were born in the winter, in a house much like the one you stand before now, and you will likely die here as well, when your time comes. There is no bitterness in this thought, no sense of tragic limitation. It is simply the way things are, the pattern into which your life was woven before you had any say in the matter. Your world is measured in versts, not vast distances, and in seasons rather than years. You know the forest that surrounds the village in all its moods, the bright cruelty of winter, the black mud of spring, the brief startling green of summer, and the golden resignation of autumn. You know which trees yield the best firewood, where the berry bushes grow thickest, and how to read the sky for signs of coming storms. But tonight, as you turn toward the door of your home, your knowledge feels both essential and insufficient. You know what is coming. You have survived many winters, and each one has taught you something about cold, about darkness, about the slow passage of hours when there is nothing to do but endure. Yet each winter also brings with it a kind of forgetting, a mercy perhaps, so that the full weight of it does not crush you before it even begins. Now, as the temperature begins its nightly descent, memory returns, and with it a familiar tightness in your chest that is not quite fear but something closer to profound respect. The door of your izba, your home, is low and narrow. You have to duck slightly to enter, and the threshold is worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Inside, the air is already different. It is not warm, not yet, but it is still, and that stillness is the first line of defense against what waits outside. The single room that constitutes your home is dim, lit only by the fading light that filters through a small window covered with a scraped and oiled bladder, translucent but not transparent. Shapes emerge slowly as your eyes adjust, the large clay and brick structure that dominates one wall, the pesh, the great stove that is both hearth and altar in this place. There are wooden benches built along the walls, a rough table, a few shelves holding clay pots and wooden bowls. In the corner, icons hang on the eastern wall, their painted faces barely visible in the gloom, watching over the household with expressions of eternal patience. Your wife is already tending to the stove, feeding it split birch logs that catch quickly, their bark curling and blackening, releasing the sweet sharp smell of burning resin. She does not look up as you enter. There is no need for greeting or explanation. You are both moving within a routine that has been practiced so many times it has become almost ceremonial. She knows you have been checking the animals, ensuring they are secured in the small lean-to attached to the side of the house. You know she has been preparing the evening meal, a pot of kasha thickening over the fire, perhaps a piece of salted fish if the stores allow. The children are gathered near the stove, 2 of them, a boy and a girl, already dressed in every piece of clothing they own. Layers of rough-spun wool and linen, patched and repatched, shapeless with use. Their faces are red from the heat of the stove, their eyes bright. They are young enough still to find some excitement in the drama of winter nights, the sense of the household drawing together against the outer darkness. In a few years, they will understand it differently, the way you do now, but for the moment they are simply glad to be near the warmth, near their parents, in the small secure circle of firelight. You remove your outer coat, a heavy sheepskin garment that smells of smoke and animal and your own sweat. It is stiff in places where moisture has frozen and thawed repeatedly. You hang it on a wooden peg driven into the log wall, and already you can feel the cold creeping through the remaining layers of your clothing. The izba is warming, but slowly. Heat is a precious resource, hoarded and distributed with care. Too much would burn too quickly means less for tomorrow night, and the night after that, and all the nights that stretch ahead through the long Siberian winter. Your wife ladles kasha into wooden bowls, and you sit together at the table. There is no conversation, not because there is tension or unhappiness, but because there is no need. Words are also a kind of expenditure, and in the economy of a winter night, silence is often more efficient. You eat slowly, feeling the warm porridge settle in your stomach, a small furnace of its own. The children eat with the focused intensity of young animals, and when they are finished, they lick their bowls clean without shame or pretense. After the meal, the rhythm of evening tasks continues. Your wife clears the bowls and wipes the table with a damp rag. You check the seams of the door, pressing moss and old rags into any gaps where cold air might slip through. This is a nightly ritual, this sealing of the house, making it as tight as possible against the predatory cold. You check the window, running your hand along its edges, feeling for drafts. The children are sent to relieve themselves one last time, a quick trip to the designated spot just outside the door, and they return gasping and laughing at the shock of the outside air. As full darkness settles, you light a small oil lamp, a precious item that casts a flickering yellow glow across the room. The lamp will burn for a few hours, no more. Oil is expensive, and the household supply must last until spring. But these hours of light are important. They mark the transition from day to night, from activity to rest, and they provide a psychological warmth that is almost as important as the physical heat radiating from the stove. The stove itself is the heart of the izba, and it is a remarkable piece of engineering, born from centuries of adaptation to this unforgiving climate. It is massive, built from clay bricks and river stones, rising nearly to the ceiling. Its internal structure is a maze of channels and chambers designed to extract every possible measure of heat from burning wood. Smoke winds through these passages, releasing its warmth before finally escaping through a chimney that can be sealed with a wooden damper when the fire dies down, trapping heat inside. The flat top of the stove provides a sleeping platform, and the space above it, near the ceiling where warm air collects, is the warmest place in the house. Tonight, as the fire settles into a steady burn, you begin the process of arranging the household for sleep. This too is a carefully choreographed activity. The children will sleep on top of the stove, in the place of greatest warmth. Your wife has already spread a thin mattress of straw and old cloth up there, along with every available blanket and fur. The children climb up eagerly, their faces glowing with heat, and within minutes they are burrowed into their nest, only their eyes visible in the dim light. You and your wife will sleep on the wide bench that runs along the side of the stove, close enough to feel its warmth but not so close as to take the precious space from the children. You pull out the bedding that is stored during the day beneath the bench, more straw, a wool blanket woven by your wife's mother, and a large sheepskin that serves as both mattress and cover. The bench is hard, and you have slept on it for so many years that your body has learned its contours, the way a river learns the shape of its bed. Before lying down, you perform one last task. You go to the icon corner and cross yourself 3 times, bowing your head. Your wife does the same. This is not mere superstition or empty ritual. In a world where survival depends on forces largely beyond your control, the weather, the harvest, the whims of the master, the health of animals, faith provides a framework for endurance. The icons watch over you with their stylized faces and golden halos, representations of a spiritual order that promises meaning beyond the immediate hardships of physical existence. You do not pray with elaborate words. You simply stand for a moment in silence, acknowledging something larger than yourself, and then you turn back to the business of the night. The lamp is extinguished. Darkness fills the room like water, complete and absolute. For a few moments, the only sound is breathing, your own, your wife's, the softer writher of the children above. Then, gradually, other sounds emerge. The creak and pop of wood as the izba settles. The whisper of wind finding its way through infinitesimal gaps in the walls. The muted crackling of the fire inside the stove. And beneath it all, a deeper sound, or perhaps not a sound but a presence, the vast silence of the Siberian night pressing against the thin walls of your home. You lie on your side, your wife's back against your chest, sharing warmth in the most practical of embraces. You are both fully clothed, and you have pulled the sheepskin over both of you, tucking it carefully around your bodies to trap every bit of heat. Even so, you can feel the cold beginning to assert itself. It comes through the walls, through the floor, down from the ceiling. It is patient and relentless, and you know from experience that by morning, if the fire dies completely, there will be frost on the inside of the walls, and your breath will hang visible in the air even within the izba. But for now, there is warmth enough. The stove radiates heat into the darkness, a slow steady pulse that you can feel against your side. Your body begins to relax, muscle by muscle, and your thoughts start to drift in that peculiar way they do on the edge of sleep, loosening their grip on the immediate and tangible, floating toward memory and half-dream. You think about your father, who slept in this same house, on this same bench, through winters that he claimed were even colder than those you have known. He died 10 years ago, in the spring, and you remember him as a man who spoke little but moved with calm efficiency through every task. He taught you how to build a fire that would burn slowly through the night, how to judge the quality of firewood by its weight and smell, how to read the behavior of animals as they prepared for winter. He taught you patience, which is perhaps the most essential skill for surviving the Siberian winter. Patience to endure cold, to endure darkness, to endure the slow passage of time when there is nothing to do but wait for the season to turn. Your mother lived longer, dying only 3 years ago in her sleep during a January night much like this one. She simply did not wake up, and in a way, everyone agreed it was a gentle death, as deaths go in this place. She had taught you different lessons, how to make the most of meager resources, how to repair and reuse everything until it literally fell apart, how to find small comforts in the midst of hardship. She had a way of humming tunelessly while she worked, a sound that had filled the izba throughout your childhood, and sometimes, in the quiet moments, you think you can still hear it. Outside, the temperature continues to fall. You cannot see a thermometer, such instruments belong to the educated classes in distant cities, but your body knows the stages of cold the way a musician knows notes. There is the cold that makes you pull your coat tighter, and the cold that makes your fingers ache, and the cold that turns your breath to ice in your beard. Then there is the cold that goes beyond discomfort into danger, the cold that can kill a person in minutes if they are caught unprepared. Tonight, it is this last kind of cold that is settling over the land, and you are grateful beyond measure to be inside, to have walls and roof and fire between yourself and that vast indifference. You hear one of the children shift on top of the stove, a soft rustle of straw and cloth, followed by a small contented sigh. The sound fills you with a fierce protective tenderness. Your children have never known anything but this life, this village, these winter nights. They accept it all with the adaptability of youth, and you hope that this acceptance will serve them well, that they will grow strong and resilient, capable of enduring whatever the years bring. You hope they will remember these nights with something other than bitterness, that they will understand the warmth of family and the security of routine as gifts that matter more than comfort or wealth. Time becomes strange in the darkness. Minutes stretch and compress. You are not quite asleep but no longer fully awake. Your mind drifts through fragments of thought, tomorrow's tasks, the state of the firewood supply, the health of the cow in the lean-to, the upcoming obligations to the master's estate. These thoughts rise and fade without urgency. There is nothing to be done about any of them now, in the middle of the night, and so they pass through your consciousness like clouds across a dark sky. At some point, you become aware that the fire in the stove has died down. You can tell by the quality of the heat, which has diminished from a strong radiant warmth to something gentler, more diffuse. This is expected. The stove will hold heat for many hours, releasing it slowly into the room, but the active fire cannot be maintained all night. There is not enough wood, and more practically, no one to tend it. Sleep is also a necessity, and the household must trust in the design of the stove, in the thickness of the walls, and in the warmth of shared bodies to carry everyone through to morning. You pull the sheepskin a little higher, covering your shoulder, and settle more deeply into the curve of your wife's body. Her breathing has become slow and regular, and you match your own breath to hers, an unconscious synchronization that happens every night. In this moment, despite the cold that waits outside, despite the hardship that defines your life in ways both large and small, there is a quality of peace that fills the darkness of the Izba. It is not happiness, exactly, nor contentment in any simple sense. It is something more fundamental, the peace of knowing your place, of fulfilling your role, of being part of a pattern that extends backward and forward through generations. You are a link in a chain, and the chain holds. The night deepens. The village around you is silent, each household sealed into its own small world of warmth and darkness. No lights burn in windows. No one moves through the streets. The entire human presence in this vast landscape has contracted into these small wooden boxes, into these fragile islands of warmth, waiting together for the morning that will eventually come, as it always has, as everyone trusts it always will. And so you sleep, there on the hard bench beside the cooling stove, wrapped in worn sheepskin and the warmth of another body, your children safe above you, your ancestors watching from the icon corner, the long winter night unfolding around you like a dark flower that will, in time, close again and give way to light. You wake in the deepest part of the night, not suddenly but gradually, rising through layers of sleep like someone swimming up from the bottom of a dark pool. For a moment, you are disoriented, unsure of what has disturbed you. The Izba is utterly dark, and utterly cold. Not the killing cold of the outside world, but cold nonetheless, a penetrating chill that has worked its way through the sheepskin, through your clothes, settling into your bones. You realize that your nose and cheeks are numb, the only parts of your body exposed to the air. You lie still, listening. Your wife sleeps on, her breathing unchanged. From above, you hear nothing from the children, which means they are either deeply asleep or lying quiet in their warm nest. The stove still radiates some heat, but it is faint now, a memory of fire rather than fire itself. You know without looking that the embers have died down to almost nothing, and that the coldest hours of the night are upon you. This waking is not unusual. Most winter nights, you wake at least once, sometimes more. It is the body's response to cold, a primal alertness that will not allow complete abandon to sleep when survival might depend on vigilance. You have learned not to fight it, not to resent it. Instead, you use these wakeful periods to check on the household, to listen for any sounds that might indicate problems, a child coughing, an animal in distress, the wind rising to dangerous levels. Tonight, all is quiet. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb your wife, and flex your fingers and toes, checking for numbness. Everything responds, sluggishly but adequately. You are cold but not dangerously so. The night is proceeding as it should, with no crisis, no emergency, just the slow patient endurance that characterizes winter survival. You close your eyes again, but sleep does not return immediately. Instead, your mind wanders through the landscape of memory and thought, that strange country that opens up in the darkness when the body is still but the mind resists rest. You think about the master's estate, 20 versts to the south, where you and the other serfs will be called to work when winter breaks. You think about the obligations that define your existence, so many days of labor owed, so much produce to be delivered, so many restrictions on your movement and choices. You think about these things without anger or resentment, because such emotions would serve no purpose and would only disturb the equilibrium you have learned to maintain. You think instead about the small freedoms that do exist within the structure of serfdom. The right to cultivate your own garden plot during the brief growing season. The ability to gather mushrooms and berries from the forest. The permission to fish in certain streams at certain times. These are not trivial things. They are the margin that makes life possible, the difference between bare survival and something that occasionally approaches adequacy. The cold intensifies, or perhaps you are simply becoming more aware of it as wakefulness settles over you. You can feel it pressing against the walls of the izba, testing every seam and joint, searching for ways to enter. The structure holds, as it has held through countless such nights, but you can sense the effort it takes, the constant silent battle between inside and outside, between the human world of warmth and intention and the indifferent vastness of the Siberian night. You have learned the shape of cold now, the way it moves through the air like something alive, something patient. The first days of winter brought sharp winds that cut through wool and skin alike, but those winds have settled into something deeper, a stillness that wraps the village in its own particular silence. You stand at the threshold of the long house, the izba that shelters you and 12 other families, and you watch the afternoon light drain from the sky. It is only 3 hours past midday, but already the sun hangs low and weak, a pale disk that gives light without warmth, that sketches long blue shadows across the snow before surrendering entirely to the gathering dark. The village sits in a shallow depression between two low ridges, a placement chosen generations ago for the small protection it offers from the worst winds. 47 izbas cluster here, their log walls chinked with moss and clay, their roofs thick with turf that now lies buried under snow. Smoke rises from each dwelling in thin gray columns that merge with the sky, and you can smell the wood burning, the sharp scent of birch and pine, the occasional richness of dried dung when wood grows scarce. Beyond the village, the taiga stretches in all directions, an ocean of dark conifers that holds its own mysteries, its own dangers. You know these trees, have worked among them since childhood, but in winter they become something else, a boundary between the known world and the vast indifference of the land. The estate to which you belong lies 3 days' journey to the south, a journey no one attempts between October and April. The master's representative came in September, counted the harvest, took the required portion, and left instructions for winter obligations, so many logs to be cut, so many animal pelts to be prepared, so much work to be completed before the spring accounting. Then he departed, and you were left to the rhythms that have governed this place for as long as anyone remembers. The master exists now only as an abstraction, a distant fact, while the immediate reality is the cold, the dark, the careful rationing of resources that will determine who sees another summer. You have been preparing for this since you were old enough to understand what winter meant. Your father taught you, as his father taught him, the small essential knowledge that makes survival possible. How to read the sky for coming storms. How to layer birch bark beneath your shoes for insulation. How to slow your breathing and your movements to conserve heat. How to recognize the early signs of frostbite, the white numbness that creeps into fingers and toes and ears, and what to do when you see it. How to judge the thickness of ice on the river. How to find your way home when the world becomes nothing but white upon white, when snow and sky merge into a single blinding emptiness. The izba behind you radiates a warmth you can feel even through the doorway. Inside, the great brick stove that dominates the single room still holds the heat from this morning's fire, its mass designed to absorb and release warmth slowly across the long hours between feedings. The families who share this space have already arranged themselves for the evening, claiming their sleeping positions on and around the stove according to a hierarchy subtle and absolute. The oldest sleep on top of the stove itself, where the heat is greatest. Children nest in the shelf-like spaces built into the stove's sides. Young adults and the middle-aged arrange themselves on the wooden platforms that line the walls, while the very poorest and least fortunate make do with straw pallets on the floor, as far from the stove as the room allows. You are neither the oldest nor the youngest, neither the most fortunate nor the least. Your place is on the third tier of sleeping platforms, high enough to escape the worst floor drafts but not so high that the heat becomes stifling. You share this space with your wife, your 2 surviving children, and your mother, who has outlived 3 husbands and who possesses a knowledge of winter survival that borders on the mystical. She knows which herbs will keep scurvy at bay when fresh food disappears. She knows how to render every part of every animal into something useful. She knows the old songs, the endless story cycles that make the dark hours pass, and she knows when to speak and when silence serves better. The division of labor in these months follows patterns established so long ago that no one questions them. The men venture out when necessary to check trap lines, to hunt if conditions allow, to cut wood from the designated sections of forest, to fish through holes in the river ice. The women maintain the interior world, spinning flax and wool, mending clothing and boots, preparing what food exists, managing the children, keeping the social fabric of the close-packed dwelling from tearing under the pressure of proximity and scarcity. The children work too, the older ones helping with adult tasks, the younger ones charged with gathering what small combustibles can be found, with keeping the water bucket filled, with 100 small essential duties that free adult hands for heavier work. You step back inside and pull the door closed behind you, fitting it carefully into its frame. The door is double-layered, with a small vestibule between inner and outer panels, a space that traps air and provides one more barrier against the cold. Even this small architectural detail represents accumulated wisdom, a refinement made over generations of winter nights. Nothing here is accidental. Every element of the Izba's construction, every tool, every habit and custom, has been tested against the Siberian winter and found adequate to the task of keeping human life intact. The interior smells of bodies and smoke, of cooking and wool, of the particular mustiness that comes from too many people living too close together with too little ventilation. It is not an unpleasant smell, merely a human one, and you have known it all your life. The single room measures perhaps 20 feet on each side, and into this space 47 people arrange their existence. Privacy does not exist here. Modesty becomes a matter of convention and careful inattention rather than physical separation. You learn from childhood to create mental spaces, interior rooms where private thoughts can dwell unshared. You learn to sleep through noise, to conduct necessary bodily functions without shame or comment, to grant others the fiction of solitude when circumstances permit no actual solitude at all. The light inside comes from 2 sources, the small windows, now mostly blocked with snow but still admitting a faint glow during the brief daylight hours, and a single tallow lamp that burns near the stove. Fat is precious, and the lamp burns only when necessary, when someone must work with needle and thread or prepare food with some precision. Most of the time, the light from the stove's ventilation slots provides enough illumination for the simple tasks that fill the hours. Your eyes have adjusted to this dimness over the years until you can navigate the room's obstacles in near total darkness, can identify people by the sound of their breathing, can find your own bedding by touch and habit. Your wife sits near the stove, working wool with a drop spindle, the motion of her hands steady and automatic. She has been spinning since she was 4 years old, and her fingers move with the kind of certainty that comes from endless repetition. The thread she creates is uneven by the standards of town craftsmen, thick and thin by turns, but it is strong and it will become cloth, and cloth is wealth here in a way that gold could never be. She looks up as you enter, and though she says nothing, something in her expression asks a question. You shake your head slightly. The traps you checked this afternoon were empty, as they have been empty for 3 days now. The animals are holed up somewhere, conserving their own energy, moving as little as possible. Your son, 8 years old and already serious beyond his years, sits at his grandmother's feet, learning to carve. She guides his hands on the knife, showing him how to work with the grain of the wood, how to let the material tell you what it wants to become. He is making a spoon, or trying to, and the wood is birch, common as air in this forest but requiring its own understanding. Your grandmother speaks to him in a low voice, a running commentary on technique and attention, and you can hear in her tone the same patience she once used teaching you. The knowledge passes this way, person to person, generation to generation, an oral library that holds everything necessary for continuation. Your daughter, 3 years younger than her brother, helps her mother with the wool, carding it with brush-like paddles that pull the fibers into alignment. Her hands are small and still clumsy at the work, but she persists with the focused determination of children who know that usefulness means belonging. She chatters as she works, a steady stream of observation and question, and your wife answers or doesn't answer depending on some calculus of maternal wisdom you have never quite understood. The sound of their voices creates a texture in the room, a domestic music that competes with the other sounds, someone coughing in the far corner, two women arguing in tense whispers about something, a baby's fractious crying, the scrape and creak of people shifting position. Old Pyotr sits on top of the stove, where he has spent most of his time for the past 3 winters. He is 74 years old, an almost impossible age in this place, and his survival is attributed to stubbornness, luck, and his position as the village's memory. He knows the location of every landmark for 30 miles in any direction. He knows which years the river froze early and which late, which winters took the most lives, which summers brought plenty, which springs promised well but delivered famine. He knows the names of the dead going back 5 generations, knows their relationships and their stories, and he holds this knowledge with the jealous care of a merchant guarding valuable stock. People come to him with questions, and he parcels out information as he sees fit, maintaining his relevance, his necessity. The social structure of the Izba is complex and mostly invisible, a web of obligation and alliance, of old grudges and older loyalties. You navigate it the way you navigate the forest, by attention and caution, by remembering what lies where. The Morozov family occupies the southern wall, 7 people across 3 generations, and they are known for their skill with leather, for their carefully hoarded supply of tanning materials. The Volkov family claims the northern platforms, 9 of them, and they control the best trap lines by virtue of the grandfather's relationship with the previous estate manager. The Sokolov family, your own, holds the eastern quarter, 5 of you now, diminished from 7 by the fever that came 3 summers ago. Status here has nothing to do with the distinctions that matter in the master's house, those elaborate hierarchies of title and precedent. Here, status derives from usefulness, from skills that serve group survival, from the ability to produce and share and maintain equilibrium. A man who can find game in lean times holds more respect than any paper decree could convey. A woman who can keep children alive through scarlet fever becomes a figure of authority that transcends formal position. The hierarchies shift subtly from year to year as people age and die, as young ones prove themselves or fail to, as circumstances reward different capabilities. The evening meal will be simple, as all meals are in deep winter. Barley porridge cooked with a small piece of salt pork, the grain stretched with water and thickened with whatever else can be added. Some withered turnips from the storage pit. Black bread, if the grinding has been done. Perhaps a thin soup made from fish heads and bones, the flesh having been eaten days ago. You eat to survive, not for pleasure, and the meals have a ritual quality, a careful division that ensures everyone receives a share. The portions are small, smaller than your hunger wants, but they are enough to keep the body functioning, to maintain the minimal heat production that makes sleep possible. You learned as a child to separate the feeling of hunger from the need for food. Hunger is constant in winter, a low background ache that you carry the way you carry the cold, acknowledging it but not dwelling on it. The body, if given regular sustenance even in small amounts, can maintain itself for months on remarkably little. The secret is consistency rather than quantity, never missing a meal even if the meal barely deserves the name. Your grandmother taught you this, taught you to eat slowly, to chew thoroughly, to drink warm water when hunger grows too insistent. She taught you that the mind can be trained to accept what is rather than longing for what was or what might be. Outside, the darkness is now complete. Through the small window opening, if you were to look, you would see nothing but black, a darkness so total it seems to have weight and substance. The stars, when clouds permit them to show, burn with cold brilliance, but they give no warmth, only a navigation aid for those rare occasions when travel cannot be avoided. The moon, waxing now toward full, will rise later and transform the snowscape into something almost bright, casting shadows and revealing the contours of drifts and trees. But the moon is a dangerous companion, its light insufficient for safe work but bright enough to tempt foolish ventures. The cold outside has deepened into the kind that makes wood crack and split, that makes breath freeze in the lungs, that can kill an unprepared person in less than an hour. This is not the cold of autumn, sharp but manageable. This is the cold that the Yakut people, far to the east, call the whisper that stops breath, and it requires absolute respect. You have seen what happens when that respect fails, have seen the gray-white flesh of frostbite, the black of gangrene that follows, the hollow-eyed despair of someone who knows they have lost toes or fingers to a moment's carelessness. You have attended burials in winter, when the ground is too frozen to dig and bodies must be stacked like cordwood in a shed until spring thaw permits proper interment. But you have also seen the beauty that lives within this harshness. You have stood in the forest on a still day and watched the snow fall in absolute silence, each flake visible in its brief descent, the world reduced to white and gray and the dark verticals of tree trunks. You have seen the sun rise through ice fog, the light breaking into rainbow shards, the trees festooned with hoarfrost so thick they look like crystal sculptures. You have heard the aurora on the coldest nights, a faint crackling hiss that accompanies those green and red curtains that wave across the northern sky, and you have wondered, as everyone wonders, what they mean, what message they carry from the realm where spirits dwell. The stove needs feeding again, and you can tell by the slight cooling of the air, by a quality of the warmth that changes imperceptibly. Dmitri Volkov, whose turn it is tonight, rises from his place and moves to the wood store, a pile of split logs stacked near the door. The wood must be brought inside hours before burning to dry and warm. Feeding wet wood to the stove would waste fuel and produce more smoke than heat. He selects pieces with the careful eye of someone who understands combustion, who knows that different woods burn at different rates, that the goal is not flame but heat, slow and steady release of the energy trapped in the wood cells. He opens the stove door, and for a moment the light increases, the glow of coals painting the room in warm orange. The ritual of fire tending is as old as human presence in these lands, older than memory, older than stories. The maintenance of flame through the killing months, the careful hoarding and feeding of this essential element, connects you to ancestors you will never know, people who faced the same darkness with cruder tools and less accumulated wisdom. The stove itself is a relatively recent innovation, only a few generations old. Before that, your people burned wood in open hearths, losing most of the heat up the smoke hole, fighting harder for every degree of warmth. The stove, with its mass and its design that captures and holds heat, represents a revolution in winter survival, a technology that changed what was possible. Dmitri closes the stove door and returns to his place, and the room settles again into its patterns of quiet activity. Someone begins to sing, a low wordless melody that might be lullaby or work song or something older than either. Others join one by one, not in unison but in a kind of loose harmony, each voice finding its own path through the tune. The song has no beginning and no end, cycling through variations, sometimes gaining intensity, sometimes falling to near silence, a collective creation that fills the space with something beyond the sum of individual voices. You join when the melody comes to a place you know, adding your own thread to the weaving, and the singing becomes another form of warmth, another defense against the dark outside. Your wife sets aside her spinning and begins to prepare the evening meal, working with the quiet efficiency of someone who has performed these actions thousands of times. She measures barley from the communal sack, the sack that represents collective survival, the pooled harvest of September that must last until May. She pours water from the bucket, water that was carried from the well by your daughter earlier, drawn up through a hole kept open by constant use and constant effort. She adds a small piece of pork from the barrel, meat preserved in salt and hanging on to something that was once flavor. The pot goes onto the stove's cooking surface, and the smell of heating grain begins to perfume the air, a smell that makes your stomach contract with anticipation despite your efforts at detachment. The children have grown quiet, their earlier energy depleted by the day's small labors. Your son has finished his carving for the evening and sits staring at the stove with the absorbed expression of someone watching pictures in the flames. Your daughter has curled up next to your mother, her head in the old woman's lap, fighting sleep with the stubborn persistence of children everywhere. Your mother strokes the child's hair with one gnarled hand, the gesture automatic, part of the long chain of comfort that women have offered children since time before time. Conversation rises and falls in small clusters throughout the room. Old Pyotr tells a story to whoever will listen, one of his endless supply of tales about previous winters, about storms and hardship, about narrow escapes and terrible losses. His voice has the quality of ceremony, the practiced cadence of a story told many times but still holding power. You have heard this particular tale before, about the winter of 1788 when the river froze so solid that loaded sledges could cross in late March, but you listen anyway because the listening is part of the fabric of the evening, part of what makes the hours pass. Two women near the western wall argue in low voices about something domestic, some division of duty or criticism of effort. You cannot hear the words but you recognize the tone, the tight control that prevents argument from becoming fight. In close quarters, anger is dangerous as fire or cold. Everyone understands this, and so disputes are managed with elaborate care, subjected to unwritten rules about volume and duration, about when to press and when to yield. The men of the village maintain a council of sorts, a loose gathering that adjudicates serious conflicts, but most issues are resolved through gossip and pressure and the weight of collective opinion. The room has grown darker as full night settles in, the small windows now contributing nothing, the lamp burning its careful flame. The light catches faces in partial illumination, creates deep shadows in the corners, makes the space feel simultaneously smaller and larger than its actual dimensions. The walls, chinked with moss and clay, breathe slightly, allowing tiny infiltrations of cold air that the stove's warmth must constantly combat. You are aware of the narrowness of the margin, how little separates this warm crowded space from the lethal cold beyond. The walls are only logs, the roof only turf and snow, the stove only brick and fire. If any element fails, if the wood runs out or the stove cracks or the roof collapses, the cold will rush in and claim what it has always waited to claim. But these thoughts are abstract, pushed aside by the immediacy of the present. Your wife calls people to eat, and they form a line, each family's representative collecting their portion. The hierarchy of feeding is clear and unquestioned, the elderly first, then children, then adults in order of contribution and need. You take your family's share, a wooden bowl of porridge and a piece of bread, and you return to your sleeping platform where you divide it further according to need. Your mother receives the largest portion, not from hunger but from respect. Your children divide the rest between them, and you and your wife share what remains, eating slowly, making it last, extracting every trace of nourishment and comfort from the simple food. The meal takes time, as all meals do here. You eat in silence mostly, focused on the food, aware of the warmth of it, the way it spreads from your stomach outward, a brief internal heat that supplements the stove's external warmth. You scrape the bowl clean with the last of the bread, and you drink water from the shared dipper, cold water that makes your teeth ache but washes down the food. Your wife collects the bowl and takes it to the washing bucket, where it will be rinsed and stacked with the others, where it will wait until morning to be used again. The evening stretches ahead, hours to fill before sleep becomes possible. Some people have already retreated to their sleeping spaces, conserving warmth and energy. Others continue with small tasks, work that can be done in dim light by familiar hands. Your mother has begun to tell a story to the children who remain awake, not Pyotr's kind of historical account but a fairy tale, one of the old stories about Baba Yaga or the Firebird, stories that carry their own truth, different from fact but no less important. Her voice rises and falls with the story's rhythms, and you listen even though you know the tale by heart, because the listening is its own kind of work, its own contribution to the night's passage. You settle into your place on the sleeping platform, arranging the straw beneath you, pulling your coat around your shoulders. Your wife joins you, fitting her body against yours in the practiced way of long marriage, seeking and sharing warmth. The children are already asleep, their breathing deep and regular. Your mother finishes her story and falls silent, and gradually the room quiets, the various activities winding down, people choosing sleep over consciousness, choosing the hours of oblivion that make survival possible. Outside, the cold deepens further. The temperature falls in the clear air, dropping to levels that seem impossible, that reach toward numbers that cease to have meaning. The snow squeaks under its own weight. Trees crack with reports like musket fire. The river ice groans and shifts, adjusting to the pressure of its own freezing. But inside the izba, the warmth holds, the stove radiates its stored heat, and 47 people sleep in a tangle of humanity, their combined breath and bodies creating a small pocket of life in the vast frozen darkness. You lie awake a while longer, aware of the breathing around you, of your wife's warmth along your side, of your mother's presence just beyond your feet. You think about nothing in particular, letting your mind drift through images and memories, through the small events of the day, through plans for tomorrow if tomorrow permits plans. You think about the trap lines to be checked, the wood to be cut, the endless maintenance that winter requires. You think about your children growing up in this place, learning what you learned, carrying forward what was carried to you. You think about the master's distant estate, about the accounting that will come in spring, about the portion of your labor that belongs to someone you have never met. But mostly you simply exist, suspended in the moment, neither asleep nor quite awake, held in the particular peace that comes when there is nothing to be done except endure. The night extends around you, vast and cold and indifferent, but you are here, alive, warm enough, fed enough, and tomorrow will come with its own demands and its own small mercies. The darkness presses against the walls, patient and eternal, but the walls hold, the stove burns, and the night passes as all nights pass, moment by moment, breath by breath, until the first gray light returns and the cycle begins again. You wake before the bells, before even the crows have begun their morning arguments in the frozen birches beyond the village edge. The darkness in the izba is complete, textured, a living thing that presses against your eyelids and fills your lungs with each careful breath. Somewhere in that darkness, you hear the soft whisper of straw as someone else stirs, perhaps old Pyotr adjusting the weight of his arm which has gone numb beneath him, or perhaps young Katya turning in her sleep, murmuring words in a dream language that belongs to summer, to a season none of you have seen in months. The cold has found its way through every crack and seam during the night, patient as always, and now it sits in layers throughout the room, warmer near the ceiling where the last heat from yesterday's fire has risen and clung to the blackened beams, colder as you move downward, and coldest of all along the packed earth floor where frost has painted delicate fern patterns that you cannot see but know are there, having seen them on countless mornings just like this one. You do not move yet. Movement requires decision, and decision requires a kind of energy that the body hoards jealously in these hours, spending it only when absolutely necessary. Instead you lie still and take stock of yourself in the methodical way you have learned over years of winters. Your fingers, can you feel them all? Can you curl them slowly within the mitten someone placed on your hands while you slept? Your toes, there is the familiar ache in the 3 smallest ones on your left foot, the persistent reminder of that night 5 winters ago when you lingered too long checking the goats and paid the price in flesh that turned black and was cut away by the bailiff's wife who knew such things. Your nose burns with cold but not unbearably. Your chest moves, your heart continues its steady work, and you are, for another day, alive. The realization comes without joy or sorrow, simply as fact, the way you might note the presence of snow or the absence of wind. You are alive, and therefore you will rise, and therefore the day will unfold in its prescribed patterns, and therefore you will do what must be done until night returns and you can seek this darkness again, this temporary reprieve in which nothing is asked of you except that you continue breathing. Around you the izba holds 13 souls, though you cannot see any of them. You know their positions by memory, the Volkov family clustered nearest the stove, 3 generations compressed into the space a single person might occupy in summer, their combined warmth a small defiance against the cold. The widow Anya in her corner with her remaining daughter, both so thin now that they seem to take up no space at all, as though they are already halfway to becoming ghosts. The brothers Mikhail and Grigory who sleep sitting up, backs against the wall, because Mikhail's lungs fill with fluid when he lies flat and he wakes choking and terrified. And the others, each in their designated place, each wrapped in whatever they possess, sheepskins worn to the leather, felted wool that has been passed down through generations, blankets that are more whole than fabric, patched and repatched until the original material is only a memory. You hear the first crackle from the stove, a sound so faint it might be imagined, but then it comes again. Someone has risen before you, is feeding precious twigs to the embers that were buried in ash the night before, coaxing them back to life with the kind of patience that cannot be taught, only learned through necessity. The darkness begins to shift, not brightening but changing quality, and you know that Daria, who always wakes first, who appointed herself guardian of the morning fire, is moving in that space with the certainty of the blind, her hands knowing every surface, every distance, every location of fuel and kindling. You push yourself up, feeling the weight of every covering that has kept you alive through the night, 3 layers of clothing that you have not removed since October, the heavy coat that serves as blanket, the smaller coat rolled as pillow. Your body protests, joints stiff and reluctant, muscles cramped from maintaining the same position for hours, and you move slowly, carefully, mindful not to disturb those still sleeping. The cold strikes your face with fresh intensity as you emerge from the small cocoon you had created, and you pull the cloth higher around your nose and mouth, breathing through layers of wool that have become stiff with the frozen moisture of yesterday's breath. Daria glances toward you as you approach the stove, her face illuminated from below by the small flames she has nurtured into being. She looks ancient in this light, though you know she has not yet seen 40 winters. Her eyes are sunken deep, her skin drawn tight over bones that seem too prominent, too close to the surface. But her hands move with sureness as she places each piece of fuel, and when she nods to you it is with the solidarity of fellow soldiers in a long campaign. You do not speak. Speech is expensive in these hours, requiring moisture the body cannot spare, creating clouds of vapor that represent heat escaping into the indifferent air. Instead you assume your position at the far side of the stove, where the second person always sits during the waking, and you take up the work of splitting the smaller branches into sizes that will feed the growing fire without overwhelming it. Your hands remember this task, have performed it thousands of times, and you find a kind of meditation in the small, precise movements, the positioning of each branch, the application of pressure with the knife whose blade has been sharpened so many times that it is half the width it once was, the clean snap as the wood separates. The fire grows, and with it a sphere of warmth begins to radiate outward, pushing back the cold by small increments. Others begin to stir, rising in their established order, the hierarchy of need determining who approaches the stove first. The children come, 3 of them who are young enough to warrant priority, and Daria guides them to sit close, unwrapping their hands and feet to check for the telltale whiteness that signals damage. They are fortunate this morning, all fingers and toes are merely cold, not frozen, and they are waved back to their places to wrap again in their coverings while the adults take their turn. You watch as old Pyotr shuffles forward, moving with the characteristic carefulness of someone whose body has become unreliable. His left leg drags slightly, has dragged since the stroke that took him 3 winters ago, and he leans heavily on the staff that goes everywhere with him now. He holds his hands toward the fire, and you see that they are shaking, a tremor that never stops anymore, that has become simply part of who he is. Once those hands had been steady enough to carve the decorative shutters that still hung on the bailiff's house, intricate patterns of birds and flowering vines that were, perhaps, the most beautiful things in the entire settlement. Now they shake, and Pyotr is useful primarily for the tasks that require sitting still, sorting seeds, mending nets, telling stories to the children on the longest nights. The morning routine unfolds in its familiar sequence, each person taking their moment at the fire, assessing the night's damage, preparing themselves for the day ahead. The light strengthens gradually, seeping through the small window that has been covered with scraped hide rather than glass, a milky illumination that speaks of heavy clouds and probably more snow. By the time the day is fully established, perhaps 2 hours after Daria first woke, the entire household has risen and the izba has become almost warm, a relative term, meaning only that breath no longer clouds quite so thickly, that fingers can bend without pain, that the thought of stepping outside has moved from impossible to merely terrible. Breakfast is the same as it has been for weeks, a thin gruel made from barley that was intended as animal feed, stretched with water until each person's portion fills a small wooden bowl but provides little substance. You eat slowly, spacing each spoonful, letting the warm liquid trickle down your throat where it creates a brief internal glow before dissipating. The barley has a bitter, chaffy taste, and you can feel the hull pieces catching between your teeth, but you consume every drop and scrape the bowl clean with your finger, licking it to capture even the residue. Around you others do the same, eating in silence, focused entirely on this moment of modest sustenance. The children finish first, as they always do, and receive the small piece of dried fish that is their supplement, a thumb-sized portion that they consume entirely, bones and all, chewing with the thoroughness of those who understand the value of every particle of food. The widow Anya eats only half her portion, saving the rest for her daughter, and though Daria frowns at this and makes a gesture suggesting she should eat it all, Anya simply shakes her head and covers the bowl with her hand, claiming it for later, claiming it for the younger woman who is her entire reason for continuing to wake each morning. When the bowls have been set aside, when the brief infusion of calories has spread through blood and muscle, the discussion of the day's work begins. This is conducted by Fyodor, who is not the oldest person in the Izba but who holds the unofficial position of leader by virtue of his practical knowledge and his ability to make decisions quickly. He speaks in the low, measured tones that waste no words, and you listen as he outlines what must be done. The animals must be checked, the 4 goats who share the smaller Izba attached to this one, the chickens who have stopped laying but must be kept alive against the hope of spring. The path to the stream must be dug out from yesterday's snowfall so that water can be fetched. The manure pile must be turned and a portion brought inside to add to the compost layer that provides a small amount of heat beneath the floor. Wood must be gathered from the forest, though how much and how far one must go depends on the weather, which must be assessed by someone who will step outside and report back. You volunteer for this last task, as you often do, and Fyodor nods his acceptance. You are one of the younger adults in the household, 32 winters to your memory, and though you are not strong, no one is strong anymore, you are still capable of the kinds of exertion that defeat the older members. You move to the area near the door where the outdoor clothing is kept, and you begin the process of preparation. First comes the additional wrapping of your feet, strips of linen wound over the layers already there, then the outer boots of felt that come to your knees. Then the second coat, heavier than the first, patched extensively with mismatched materials that make it a document of winters past. Then the scarf, wound multiple times around your head so that only your eyes remain exposed. Then the mittens, 2 pairs, the inner ones of knitted wool and the outer ones of leather lined with rabbit fur. Each layer is pulled on slowly, tucked and adjusted to eliminate gaps, creating a barrier between your body and the outside world. When you are fully dressed you pause, gathering yourself, knowing that the transition from inside to outside is a shock that must be managed carefully. You place your hand on the door latch, feeling the cold radiating through the wood, and you take 3 slow breaths, filling your lungs with the relatively warmer air of the Izba. Then you lift the latch and push. The cold hits you like a physical blow, stealing the breath from your lungs, making your eyes water instantly so that tears freeze on your eyelashes. The wind, which had been inaudible inside, is now a constant roar, driving snow in horizontal streams that sting any exposed skin and find every microscopic gap in your clothing. You step out quickly and pull the door shut behind you, knowing that every second it remains open is heat escaping, is comfort stolen from those inside. The world is white and gray, sky and ground merged into a single continuous field broken only by the dark shapes of the other Izbas, the skeletal silhouettes of bare trees, the humped forms of covered woodpiles. The snow is deep, well past your knees, and each step requires you to lift your leg high and then plunge it down, breaking through the crust on top and sinking into the softer layers beneath. The path that was cleared yesterday is already half filled, visible only as a slight depression in the otherwise uniform surface. You begin walking, establishing a rhythm, step, lift, keeping your breathing steady despite the burning sensation in your lungs as you inhale air so cold it feels sharp, dangerous. Your destination is the edge of the forest, perhaps 500 paces from the Izba, where you will be able to judge the conditions based on how the wind moves through the trees, how much new snow has fallen, whether the cold is the relatively bearable kind or the kind that kills. As you walk you see other figures emerging from other Izbas, similarly wrapped, similarly anonymous in their layers of protection. One raises an arm in greeting and you return the gesture, recognizing Ilya by his height and the particular tilt of his head. He is heading toward the manor house, where he serves as part of the household staff, one of the few positions that comes with marginal benefits, occasional extra food, work done indoors, the goodwill of the bailiff which can mean the difference between survival and death. You do not envy him. His work is warmer, yes, but it comes with complications you are grateful to avoid, the whims of masters, the politics of favoritism, the constant need to appear useful and grateful and pleased with whatever scraps are offered. Your work is simpler, harder on the body but clearer in its demands. You owe labor, measured in days and tasks, and when that labor is completed you owe nothing until the next day, the next task. The forest, when you reach it, is transformed by cold and snow into something that resembles the forests of summer only in the most basic structural sense. The birches stand in their close ranks, their white bark making them seem to glow against the darker snow, their bare branches creating complex patterns against the gray sky. The pines, more numerous farther in, are laden with snow, each bough bent under the weight, creating canopies and caves and spaces where the accumulation is less. The wind sounds different here, filtered through the branches, rising and falling in pitches that are almost musical. You stand at the forest's edge and make your assessment. The snow that fell during the night is perhaps a hand's breadth deep, significant but not catastrophic. The wind is strong but not the kind of strong that makes travel fatal, not the kind that can blow a person off their feet and bury them in drifts. The cold is intense but stable, not deepening into the dangerous ranges where exposed skin freezes in minutes. It is, you conclude, a workable day, a day when tasks can be attempted and probably completed. You turn back toward the Izba, retracing your broken path, and as you walk you let your mind settle into the particular state of awareness that winter requires. You are conscious of your body in a way that summer never demands, the temperature of your extremities, the quality of your breathing, the efficiency of your movement. You are aware of the environment in minute detail, the direction of the wind, the texture of the snow underfoot, the weight of the sky which speaks of more weather coming but not immediately. You exist in a state of constant vigilance that is also a kind of meditation, the self reduced to its essential function of maintaining life from one moment to the next. Back inside, after the ritual of removing the outer layers and standing close to the stove while your body readjusts, after the strange pain of warming that is almost worse than the cold itself, you make your report. Fyodor listens, nods, assigns tasks. You will go with Mikhail and Grigory to gather wood, taking the small sledge and working in the nearer sections of the forest where deadfall can be found without the need to venture too far. The Volkovs will manage the animal care. Darya and 2 others will make the trip to the stream for water. The oldest and youngest will remain inside, tending the fire and performing the sedentary tasks that keep the household functioning. The work assignments are not debated. There was a time, long ago when you were a child, when you remember there being more discussion, more individual preference accommodated. But that was before the series of brutal winters that began 7 years ago, before the crop failures and the fever that swept through the village taking half the children, before the new bailiff arrived with his stricter accounting and reduced allowances. Now there is simply work that must be done and people who will do it, and the goal is survival rather than satisfaction. You prepare again for outside, though less extensively this time, knowing that you will be moving, generating heat through exertion. Mikhail and Grigory do the same, and the 3 of you step out into the cold together, pulling the small wooden sledge that is essential for transport in deep snow. The sledge is crude but functional, made from bent wood and rope, its runners worn smooth by years of use. It glides over the snow's surface more easily than walking, though pulling it still requires constant effort. The 3 of you move in single file, taking turns at the front where the work of breaking trail is hardest. No one speaks. Speech is both difficult through the rapt faces and unnecessary, as you all know the task and the route. You enter the forest and begin the search for suitable fuel, walking in widening patterns, eyes scanning for the particular shapes that indicate dead branches, fallen trees, anything that can be gathered without tools to fell standing timber. The work is methodical and consuming. When you find a piece of wood you must first clear the snow around it, then test whether it is frozen to the ground, then work it free if possible or break it to a manageable size if not. Each piece must be evaluated for quality. Too rotten and it will provide more smoke than heat, too green and it will not burn at all, too large and it cannot be transported. The good pieces are loaded onto the sledge, arranged to balance the weight, and when the sledge is full enough that pulling it becomes genuinely difficult, the three of you begin the journey back. This cycle repeats 3 times during the day: venture out, gather, return, unload, venture out again. The sky remains gray and heavy, the temperature holds steady in its deep cold, the wind continues its variable surging. By the 3rd trip you are tired in the profound way that winter labor creates, a weariness that goes beyond muscle fatigue into something closer to the soul. Your legs ache with each step, your back protests the bending and lifting, your hands are clumsy inside their mittens and you must concentrate to make them grip. But you continue, because that is what is done, because stopping means cold, means danger, means death. You think of nothing except the immediate task: this branch, this step, this breath. The world narrows to these simple elements, and in that narrowing there is a kind of peace, the same peace you find in sleep, the peace of reduced awareness, of demands so basic that they require no thought, only endurance. By the time you return from the 3rd trip the light is failing, the gray day sliding into the grayer dusk. The woodpile beside the izba has grown substantially, enough fuel for several days if used carefully. You stand looking at it for a moment, allowing yourself the brief satisfaction of work completed, of resources secured, of another day successfully navigated. Inside, the others have completed their tasks as well. The izba has the lived-in feeling of the evening, the stove radiating heat, the space filled with bodies and breath, and the small sounds of people existing in proximity. The scent of the evening meal, more barley gruel, with an addition of some dried peas that Daria hoarded from autumn, fills the space with something approaching comfort. You take your place in the arrangement, accepting your bowl when it is offered, eating with the same focused deliberation as the morning. The food is marginally more substantial this evening, the peas adding texture and a slight nuttiness to the bitter barley, and you feel the warmth of it spreading through your core, pushing back the deep cold that has settled into your bones during the day's labor. After the meal there is the brief period that serves as the household's social time, the hour or so before sleep becomes necessary. Someone produces a handful of needles and thread and begins mending in the flickering light. Someone else checks the children for signs of frostbite or illness, examining their fingers and toes and ears with careful attention. Old Pyotr, who has been sitting quietly near the stove all day, begins to speak in his rasping voice, telling one of the stories he knows by heart, tales of saints and miracles, of trials endured and rewards granted. You listen with partial attention, having heard this particular story many times before, but the sound of his voice is soothing, the rhythm of the telling familiar and safe. The story is about a holy man who lived in a cave in the far north, who survived on nothing but prayer and the occasional crust brought by ravens, who endured cold that would kill normal men, and who eventually was granted visions of paradise. It is a story about endurance rewarded, about suffering that has meaning, about the promise that this life of hardship is not all there is. Whether you believe the story in its particulars is less important than what it offers in this moment, a narrative of hope, a framework that makes sense of suffering, a reminder that others have endured worse and found meaning in that endurance. You let the words wash over you, let them join with the warmth of the fire and the fullness of your stomach and the weariness of your body to create a state of almost contentment. As Pyotr's story winds to its conclusion, as the children begin to yawn and lean against the adults nearest them, the household begins its preparation for night. This is a reverse of the morning's routine. The fire is banked carefully, fed with larger pieces that will burn slowly through the night, then covered with ash to contain and preserve it. The positions are reassumed, each person returning to their designated space, wrapping themselves in their coverings, settling in for the long darkness. You lie down in your place, feeling the now familiar discomfort of the floor beneath you, adjusting your body to minimize the pressure on bones and joints. Around you the others are doing the same, and gradually the sounds of movement cease, replaced by the sounds of breathing, of small unconscious shifts, of the timbers creaking in the cold. You close your eyes and let your mind drift, not quite sleeping yet but moving in that direction. You think about the day that has passed, the wood that was gathered, the simple fact of survival extended by another rotation. You think about the days ahead, the weeks of winter still remaining, the uncertain promise of spring. You think about the forest with its white birches, about the particular quality of light through snow-laden branches, about the small things that hold beauty even in this harsh season. And you think about warmth, not the desperate need for it, not the constant negotiation with cold, but warmth as an abstract concept, as a memory and a hope. You remember summer, though the memory has become more idea than sensation, the feeling of sun on bare arms, the luxury of sweating, the impossible abundance of a season when food grew and nothing hurt. You imagine spring, when the snow will finally recede, when the first green shoots will push through the mud, when the air will lose its knife edge and become merely cool instead of deadly. These thoughts are your prayer, your meditation, your method of moving from wakefulness into sleep. They are familiar grooves worn smooth by repetition, paths your mind knows well. You follow them now, letting them lead you down into unconsciousness, into the small death that mimics the large one, into the darkness where nothing is required of you except that you continue breathing, that your heart continues beating, that you survive until morning when the cycle will begin again. The night settles over the izba, over the village, over the endless white expanse of Siberia in winter. The wind continues its work, rearranging snow, testing structures, seeking entry. The cold deepens, as it always does in these hours, pushing down from the cloudless sections of sky where stars burn with hard brilliance. Wolves move through the forest, their howls carrying across the frozen air, and in the village the dogs answer with their own voices, creating a dialogue of survival and territory and hunger. But inside the izba, wrapped in your layers, surrounded by the breathing of your household, you know nothing of this. You have descended into sleep, into the refuge that winter grants equally to all, where cold cannot follow, where the body's needs are temporarily suspended, where dreams can transform the frozen world into something else entirely, something green, something warm, something that waits for you in the far distance of time, beyond the white, beyond the cold, beyond this long season of endurance. The darkness outside is absolute now, and you realize that in this depth of winter, in this far corner of the empire, night is not merely the absence of day but a presence unto itself, thick and cold and insistent. You stand at the threshold of the izba once more, looking out through the narrow gap where the door meets the frame, and the wind that seeps through carries with it the particular quality of midwinter air, sharp enough to make your lungs contract, yet somehow familiar now, almost companionable in its constancy. Behind you, the others have begun the slow rotation of the evening watch, the unspoken agreement that someone must tend the fire through the long hours, that sleep must be taken in shifts so that warmth never entirely abandons this small wooden sanctuary you all share. You remember the first weeks here, when the cold seemed an enemy that could not be reasoned with, could not be placated. You remember how your fingers would go numb despite the rags wrapped around them, how your face would ache from the simple act of breathing frozen air. But the body learns, you have discovered. The body adapts in ways the mind cannot fully comprehend. Your blood moves differently now, conserving heat in your core, releasing it only where absolutely necessary. Your skin has thickened somehow, become less sensitive to the bite of frost. Even your thoughts have changed, becoming slower, more deliberate, as if rapid thinking itself generates a cold the body cannot afford. Pyotr has taken the first watch tonight. You see him settling onto the bench nearest the stove, arranging the small pile of kindling within easy reach, testing the poker to ensure it moves freely through the coals. His movements are economical, practiced. There is no wasted motion in anything he does anymore. You have all become like this, you realize, efficient in the way that animals are efficient, conserving energy for survival rather than display. The gestures of your former life, the small courtesies and elaborate manners that once seemed so essential, have fallen away like unnecessary weight. What remains is simpler, truer perhaps, though you are not certain whether this simplicity is a loss or a gain. You move to your sleeping place, the narrow space along the eastern wall where you have arranged your bedding, the straw pallet that must be refreshed weekly to maintain any semblance of softness, the wool blanket you brought from home that has become thin in places but still holds your scent, the sheepskin you traded for last autumn that serves as both mattress and covering depending on the severity of the night. You lower yourself carefully, feeling the familiar ache in your lower back, the stiffness in your knees that has become your constant companion since the work in the frozen forest began. Age is catching up with you here more quickly than it might have elsewhere, or perhaps you are simply more aware of your body's deterioration when every day demands so much of it. Beside you, old Vera has already arranged herself for sleep. She lies on her side, knees drawn up, hands tucked between her thighs for warmth, a position you have all adopted because it presents the smallest surface area to the cold. Her eyes are closed, but you can tell by the rhythm of her breathing that she is not yet asleep, merely resting, conserving her energy. She has taught you much about this, about the art of stillness, the way to let your body sink into quiet without actually sleeping, so that you remain aware of changes in temperature, shifts in the fire's warmth, sounds that might indicate danger or need. The moon is nearly full, she says without opening her eyes, and you wonder how she knows this, whether she looked earlier or whether she simply feels it in some way you have not yet learned. On nights like this, the cold is different. Sharper. The clouds hold in some warmth, but when the sky is clear, the heat just rises away into nothing. You consider this, adding it to the vast catalogue of winter knowledge you have been accumulating. It makes sense, you suppose. The clouds are like a blanket of sorts, trapping what little warmth the earth releases. Without them, everything escapes upward into the infinite darkness above. You think about heat as a living thing, always trying to flee, always seeking to disperse into the void, and your task, your only task really, is to capture it and hold it close for as long as possible. Will we need extra wood, you ask, keeping your voice low so as not to disturb the others who are already drifting toward sleep. Pyotr knows, she replies. He will build it up before he wakes Nikolai. But yes, on moon-bright nights, we burn more. You accept this, trusting in the accumulated wisdom of those who have survived previous winters here. This is your second winter, which makes you no longer entirely new, but not yet truly seasoned either. You exist in a strange middle territory, having lost the sharp edges of your initial fear but not yet having gained the deep calm of the truly experienced. You watch Vera's face in the dim firelight, the way the shadows collect in the hollows of her cheeks, the deep lines around her eyes that speak of decades of squinting against snow glare, and you wonder if you will live long enough to become like her, to embody that kind of quiet endurance. The fire pops softly, sending a small shower of sparks up toward the smoke hole, and you watch their brief arc of light before they fade. Each spark is like a tiny life, you think, a moment of brightness against the dark, then nothing. The thought is neither sad nor uplifting, it simply is, a fact to be observed without judgment. You have noticed this change in yourself, this increasing tendency toward observation without emotion, as if feeling things too strongly is a luxury you can no longer afford. Or perhaps it is simply that the scale of things has shifted, that what once seemed significant now appears small against the vast indifference of this landscape, this climate, this life. You close your eyes and turn your attention inward, to the state of your body, the inventory you perform each evening to assess the damage of the day. Your hands are cracked along the knuckles despite the tallow you rub into them each night. You can feel the small fissures, tender but not yet bleeding. Your shoulders ache from the axe work, a deep soreness that has become so constant you barely notice it except in these quiet moments. Your feet are cold, as they always are by evening, but not painfully so. They retain enough sensation that you can wiggle your toes, feel the rough wool of your stockings, the places where the fabric has worn thin and will need darning soon. Behind your closed lids, images from the day replay themselves in fragments. The moment when you first stepped outside this morning, into air so cold it seemed to solidify in your lungs. The way the snow crunched under your feet, that particular sound of deep cold, snow transformed to something closer to sand by the extreme temperature. The sight of the forest in early light, each tree encased in frost, transformed into something from a tale, beautiful and hostile in equal measure. The work itself, the endless repetition of cutting, hauling, stacking, the way your mind went blank after the first hour and you became simply a body performing tasks, thought receding to a distant background hum. You remember pausing at midday, straightening your back, and seeing Mikhail a short distance away, doing the same. For a moment, Your eyes met, and something passed between you, not quite understanding, but recognition perhaps, an acknowledgement of shared experience. He nodded once, then bent back to his work, and you did the same. It was enough. Language has become less necessary here, you have found. Words require energy, require the warmth of breath expelled into cold air. Silence is more efficient, and in that efficiency, new forms of communication have emerged, subtle and sufficient. The izba settles around you, the wood creaking as it contracts in the deepening cold outside. You have learned to read these sounds, to distinguish between the ordinary complaints of a wooden structure in winter and the more ominous groans that might indicate a problem, a beam stressed beyond endurance, a wall beginning to separate from its fellows. Tonight the sounds are normal, almost comforting in their familiarity. This building has stood for years before you arrived and will stand for years after you are gone, if you are ever gone, a thought you try not to examine too closely because hope, too, requires energy you cannot always spare. Across the room, young Dmitri coughs softly, then settles back into sleep. You listen for a moment, trying to determine if this is the beginning of illness or merely the body clearing itself of the day's accumulation of cold air and smoke. The cough does not repeat, and you relax slightly. Illness in winter is the thing everyone fears most, more than cold, more than hunger. The body has only so much strength, and if it must fight disease while also fighting cold, the outcome is uncertain at best. You have seen it happen, seen someone develop what seemed a minor ailment and then, within days, spiral into fever and delirium and death. It is the speed of it that haunts you, the way health can transform to crisis almost overnight in this climate. You open your eyes again and find yourself looking at the icon in the corner, barely visible in the dim light. It is crude, painted on a wooden board by someone with more devotion than skill, the features of the saint almost abstract in their simplicity. Yet there is something moving about it nonetheless, about the presence of this object that connects this small room to something larger, older, more permanent than any individual life. You are not certain what you believe anymore, if you ever were certain. Faith seems both more necessary and more difficult here, where the evidence of divine mercy is hard to discern in the daily struggle merely to persist. Yet you have seen moments that suggest something beyond mere survival, flashes of grace that arrive unbidden. The way Anna shared her last piece of dried fish with you when you were sick in November, giving it without comment or expectation of return. The morning you found the fox tracks near the wood pile, perfect prints in fresh snow, and felt an inexplicable surge of joy at the beauty of the pattern. The evening when Pyotr sang an old song from his village, his rough voice filling the izba with melody, and for those few minutes everyone forgot their pain and simply listened. Perhaps these moments are enough. Perhaps faith is not about belief in cosmic justice but simply the decision to notice beauty when it appears, to act with kindness when you have the strength, to continue when continuation seems impossible. The door rattles slightly in its frame, the wind testing it, and you hear Pyotr rise to check the seal, pushing rags more firmly into the gap. He returns to his seat without speaking, settling back into his watch. You admire his diligence, the way he takes his responsibilities seriously even when no one is watching. This is the kind of character that matters here, not the grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but the simple willingness to do what needs doing, night after night, without praise or recognition. You wonder what Pyotr was like before this place, whether he was always reliable or whether necessity forged these qualities in him, just as it is perhaps forging something in you. You shift slightly, trying to find a position that eases the ache in your hip, and as you move, you feel the lump of the small pouch you keep always on your person, tucked against your chest beneath your shirt. Inside it are the few things you saved from your former life, a button from your mother's dress, a small carved wooden horse your father made when you were a child, a pressed flower from the meadow behind your village, so faded now it is barely recognizable. You do not look at these objects often, the pain of remembering is too acute. But you keep them close, a talisman against total erasure, proof that you existed in another way, in another world, before this one. Sometimes you try to recall that life with clarity, the faces of your family, the layout of your village, the particular quality of light in the common fields at harvest time. But the memories are growing hazier, overlaid with the more immediate reality of this place, this life. You can still summon them if you concentrate, but they feel increasingly like stories someone told you rather than experiences you lived. Perhaps this is necessary, this fading. Perhaps to survive here completely, you must release your grip on there, must become fully present in this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. The thought frightens you, but it also offers a kind of relief, the promise that if you let go fully, the burden of loss might lighten. You realize your breathing has synchronized with Vera's beside you, a slow, steady rhythm that seems to match the pulse of the fire, the creak of the building, the movement of wind outside. There is a comfort in this synchronization, a dissolution of individual boundary into collective being. You are not just yourself in this moment but part of the larger organism of the Izba, the group of bodies sharing warmth, sharing breath, sharing the singular goal of making it through to morning. The darkness presses against the walls, and you can almost feel its weight, its hunger. But inside, the small circle of firelight holds a pocket of warmth and life carved out against the vast cold. This is enough, you think. This moment of safety, however temporary, however fragile. This is what you have, and it must be enough because it is all there is. You let your eyes close again, surrendering to the heaviness in your limbs, the pull toward sleep. But before you fully let go, you perform the ritual you have developed, the private ceremony that marks the transition from waking to sleeping. You mentally list 3 things from the day worth noting, not necessarily good things, just things that mark this day as distinct from other days, that prove time is still moving even when each day seems identical to the last. Today, you found a small icicle hanging inside the door frame, a sign that moisture was getting in somewhere, and you spent the afternoon mixing moss with mud to seal the crack. That is one thing. Nikolai told a story at midday about a bear he once saw, massive and golden in the summer sun, and everyone listened even though the story was familiar because it was a reminder that summer exists, that this cold is not eternal. That is the second thing. And at dusk, just before returning inside, you looked east and saw the sky had turned a particular shade of violet you had never noticed before, a color so beautiful it made your throat tight. That is the third thing. You hold these 3 small facts like seeds, planting them in your memory, trusting that if you continue this practice, if you gather enough of these tiny distinctions, they will eventually accumulate into something larger, a scaffold of meaning that gives structure to time. Without such markers, the days blur into a single endless experience, and that way lies a deeper cold than any exterior temperature could produce, the cold of meaninglessness, of time experienced as a flat, unchanging present with no past to remember and no future to anticipate. Sleep is pulling at you now, more insistent, and you stop resisting, letting yourself sink into that strange borderland between waking and dreaming. Your last conscious thought is of the fire, hoping it will burn steady through the night, hoping Pyotr and then Nikolai and then whoever comes after will tend it faithfully, will keep the cold at bay until morning returns and with it the next day's struggle, the next opportunity to persist. In your dreams, you are walking through deep snow, but you are not cold. The sun is bright overhead, and you realize it is spring, the snow melting, water running in rivulets everywhere, the sound of it like music. You see a birch tree ahead, its white bark gleaming, and as you approach it, you notice the tree is covered in green leaves, impossibly green, more vivid than any color you remember from waking life. You reach out to touch a leaf, and at the moment your fingers make contact, you understand something profound, though what exactly it is remains just beyond language. The knowledge fills you with a warmth that starts in your chest and spreads outward, through your limbs, to your fingers and toes, and you think, this is what summer feels like, this is what I am surviving for. But the dream shifts, as dreams do, and now you are back in the Izba, but it is different somehow, larger, more spacious, the walls seeming to recede into shadow. Everyone is there, all the familiar faces, but also others you do not recognize, generations perhaps, the long line of people who have sheltered here through countless winters. They are all sleeping, all arranged in their places, and you move among them, checking on each one, ensuring their blankets are secure, their breathing steady. You realize you are performing the watch, but unlike the actual watch where you tend the fire, in this dream watch you are tending the people themselves, ensuring their survival through sheer force of will and care. Someone is speaking, a voice you recognize but cannot place, and it is telling you something important about the nature of endurance, about how survival is not a single act but a series of small decisions, moment to moment, breath to breath, each one a choice to continue when stopping would be easier. The voice is gentle but firm, and you strain to hear every word because you sense this is knowledge you need, wisdom essential to what lies ahead. But the words begin to fade, growing softer, more distant, and you are rising toward wakefulness, losing your grip on the dream even as you try to hold it. You surface slowly, reluctantly, and for a moment you do not know where you are. Then orientation returns, the familiar dimensions of the Izba, the sound of breathing all around you, the faint smell of smoke and humanity and wool. You do not open your eyes yet, hovering in that half state, trying to determine what woke you. Then you hear it, the wind has picked up, no longer the steady blow of earlier but something more aggressive, rattling the door in its frame, making the walls creak with greater urgency. You open your eyes and see that Nikolai is now tending the fire, which means you must have slept for several hours. The light in the room is unchanged, that deep orange glow that could be midnight or 3 in the morning or any hour of the long winter night. Nikolai is building up the fire, adding larger pieces of wood, and you understand that the temperature must be dropping outside, that the clear sky Vera predicted has made the cold more intense. Without thinking about it, you begin to move, sitting up carefully so as not to wake Vera, pulling the sheepskin around your shoulders. Your body protests the movement, stiff from sleep and cold, but you work through it, knowing that to remain still when there is work to do is to give in to a dangerous lethargy. You move toward the fire, and Nikolai looks up, nods in acknowledgement of your presence. "How cold?" you ask quietly. "Bad," he replies, economical as always. "Can hear the trees splitting." You listen and hear it, occasional sharp cracks from the forest, the sound of frozen wood fracturing in the extreme cold. It is a sound you have learned to recognize, distinctly different from the normal settling sounds of the night. When wood freezes so deeply that the sap inside expands beyond what the grain can contain, it splits, sometimes explosively. You have seen the results in daylight, trees with long vertical cracks, sometimes spiraling up the trunk, the wood inside exposed and vulnerable to rot once the thaw comes. "Should wake the others?" you ask. Nikolai considers this, his face thoughtful in the firelight. "Not yet. But stay up with me. 2 of us can keep it hotter." You nod and settle onto the bench opposite him, accepting the role without discussion. This is how things work here, needs arise, people respond, no elaborate decision-making process required. You pick up a piece of wood from the pile and feed it carefully into the fire, placing it where it will catch quickly, contribute its heat efficiently. The flames lick around it, finding purchase, and within moments it is burning steadily, adding to the small inferno you are maintaining against the vast cold pressing in from all sides. For a while, neither of you speaks. The work of fire tending requires attention, not constant, but regular. You must watch the pattern of the flames, read the coals, anticipate when the next piece of wood will be needed. Too much fuel too quickly smothers the fire, too little lets it die back to coals that give heat but not enough. The balance must be maintained, a constant dialogue between human intention and elemental process. After perhaps half an hour, Nikolai breaks the silence. 30 years, he says, and you understand he is telling you how long he has been here, a piece of information he has never volunteered before. You wait, sensing there is more, knowing not to rush him. 30 years this spring, if I live to see it. Came when I was younger than you. Thought I would die the first winter. Almost did. He pauses, turning a log with the poker, sending up sparks. But then the second winter came, and I knew how to prepare. And the third. After 10, I stopped counting. After 20, I stopped thinking about leaving. You absorb this, trying to imagine 30 winters in this place, 30 cycles of freezing and thawing, 30 springs that must have seemed like resurrections. The mathematics of it staggers you, 30 years of nights like this, of tending fires, of rationing food, of watching others sicken and sometimes die. Yet here he is, still strong, still capable, the fire tending sure and practiced. Do you regret it, you ask, then immediately wish you could take the question back, afraid it is too intimate, too presumptuous. But Nikolai does not seem offended. He considers your question seriously, his eyes on the flames. Regret, he says finally, testing the word. I do not know. What does regret mean in a life you did not choose? I was sent here. I did not come willingly. So what is there to regret? My choices were to live or die, and I chose to live, day after day after day. Everything else follows from that. The simplicity of this strikes you as profound. To reduce existence to its most fundamental question, live or die, and to answer it consistently in favor of life, regardless of the conditions, regardless of the suffering. Perhaps this is the secret of endurance, you think, not hope for better circumstances, not faith in eventual rescue, but simply the decision, renewed each morning, that you will continue to exist. I think about my village sometimes, you offer, speaking more openly than you usually do. Wonder what happened to everyone. Wonder if they think about me. But it is like remembering a story, not a life I actually lived. Is that how it is for you? Nikolai nods slowly. After a while, yes. The past becomes thin, like fabric worn through. You can still see the pattern, but you can put your hand through it. It is not solid anymore. Only this is solid. He gestures around the izba, the gesture encompassing everything, the fire, the sleeping bodies, the walls holding back the night. You sit with this truth, feeling its weight and its strange comfort. If the past becomes unreal, then perhaps its losses become unreal too, or at least less sharp. And if only the present is solid, then you need only survive this moment, not all the moments stretching ahead into an impossible future. One night at a time, one cold stretch at a time, one piece of wood burning, then the next. The fire needs attention again, and you both move in unspoken coordination, Nikolai rearranging the coals while you place fresh wood in the optimal positions. The flames leap higher, and you feel the increase in heat on your face, your hands. Outside, the wind continues its assault, but inside, you are holding the line, maintaining this small pocket of warmth, this fragile victory against the elements. Behind you, someone stirs and murmurs in sleep, then settles again. You glance back and see it is young Dmitri, his face troubled even in sleep, dreaming of something that causes his brow to furrow. He is so young, you think, perhaps 19, barely old enough to have established an adult life before being sent here. You feel a surge of protective feeling toward him, a desire to shield him from the worst of this experience, though you know such shielding is impossible. Everyone must find their own way to survive. You can only hope he discovers his, that he develops the resilience necessary to endure years, perhaps decades, as Nikolai has. He will be all right, Nikolai says, following your gaze. He is stronger than he looks. They always are, the ones who look weak at first. It is the strong-looking ones you have to worry about. They think they can power through, refuse to adapt. Usually they break in the second winter, when they realize strength alone is not enough. You consider this observation, testing it against your own experience, the people you have known here. There is truth in it, you decide. Survival here requires flexibility more than strength, the ability to become smaller, slower, more patient. Those who cannot surrender their former identity, who insist on remaining who they once were, do not last. But those who allow themselves to be reshaped, who accept the transformation that this life demands, they persist. The night deepens, though you cannot mark the hour with any precision. Time in winter becomes elastic, stretched by darkness and cold into something that cannot be measured by normal means. You tend the fire and speak occasionally with Nikolai, small exchanges that break up the silence without disturbing it, observations about the cold, memories of previous winters, speculation about when the spring thaw might begin. These conversations are not profound, but they serve a purpose, affirming that you are both still here, still human, still capable of connection despite everything trying to reduce you to mere survival machines. At some point, Anna wakes and joins you at the fire. She does not explain why she is awake, and neither of you asks. Perhaps she was cold, or perhaps her sleep was troubled, or perhaps she simply felt the need to be part of the watch, to contribute to the collective effort of keeping everyone alive through the night. She sits beside you on the bench, close enough that you can share warmth, and the three of you form a small circle around the fire, a temporary community within the larger one. Anna's hands are wrapped in cloth, you notice, and you remember that she burned them last week, reaching too quickly for a pot on the stove. The burns are healing, but slowly, as all injuries heal slowly in winter when the body has barely enough resources to maintain its core temperature, let alone repair damage. She flexes her fingers carefully, testing their mobility, and you see her wince slightly at the pain. But she does not complain, does not draw attention to her discomfort. This too is part of the code here. You bear your pain privately, not because anyone demands it, but because to do otherwise is to burden the group, and the burden of mere survival is already almost more than can be collectively borne. The moon is setting, Anna says, looking toward the narrow gap around the door where faint light seeps in. Another hour and it will be darkest. You understand what she means, that the coldest part of the night is still ahead, the hours before dawn when the temperature drops to its lowest point, when the fire must be tended most carefully, when the risk of someone succumbing to cold in their sleep is greatest. This is the portion of the night you all fear most, though the fear is so familiar it has become almost comfortable, another constant companion like hunger or fatigue. I will wake Pyotr soon, Nikolai says. He can take the last watch with you. He nods toward Anna, and she accepts this assignment with a simple nod. You feel yourself fading, the hours of wakefulness catching up with you. Your eyes are growing heavy, and despite the cold, despite the need to stay alert, your body is demanding rest. You know you should return to your sleeping place, try to get a few more hours before dawn and the resumption of work. But you are reluctant to leave the fire, the circle of warmth and companionship, the sense that in this moment, tending these flames together, you are doing something important, something that matters beyond your individual survival. Still, necessity prevails, and you stand slowly, your joints protesting the movement. I should sleep, you say, stating the obvious because some things need to be acknowledged aloud, need the ritual of speaking to make them real. Sleep well, Anna says, and Nikolai nods his agreement, his attention already back on the fire. You return to your place along the wall, arrange yourself once more on the straw pallet, pull the blankets close. Vera has not moved, she might have been carved from wood, so still is her form. You match your breathing to hers once more, finding that familiar rhythm, letting it carry you down toward sleep. This time, you fall more quickly, exhausted by the hours of wakefulness and the constant expenditure of energy just to stay warm. Your dreams are fragmentary, less coherent than before, images of fire and snow, of faces you recognize and some you do not, of endless walking through a white landscape where the horizon never seems to grow closer. But underlying it all is a sense of continuance, of movement forward through time even when each day seems identical, each night an echo of the one before. You surface briefly once more, summoned by some sound or shift in the room, and you see that Pyotr is now at the fire with Anna, their silhouettes dark against the flames. They are not speaking, simply sitting together, two humans keeping watch while others sleep, fulfilling the ancient bargain that allows communities to survive hostile environments. The sight fills you with something that is not quite hope but adjacent to it, a recognition that this is what humans do, what they have always done, watched through the night for each other, tended fires together, shared the burden of survival so that no one must bear it alone. You close your eyes again, and this time when sleep takes you, it is deep and dreamless, your body surrendering completely to its need for rest. The fire continues to burn, tended by faithful hands. The cold presses against the walls but does not breach them. The night passes in its slow, relentless way, each hour folding into the next, time measured only by the consumption of wood, the rhythm of breath, the turning of the watch. Somewhere in those depths of sleep, you become aware of warmth against your side. Someone has moved closer, not pressed against you, but near enough that you share body heat, an unconscious redistribution of resources that happens sometimes in the coldest nights. You do not open your eyes to see who it is, it does not matter. What matters is the warmth, the solidarity, the silent agreement that you will keep each other alive through this night and, if fortune allows, through the next, and the next after that. The darkness outside is absolute, and the cold is a physical presence, a living thing that seeks any gap, any weakness, any opportunity to reclaim the space that fire and human will have stolen from it. But you are still here, still breathing, still warm enough to continue. The night is not yet over, but you are enduring it, all of you together, in this small wooden structure that smells of smoke and wool and humanity, this refuge carved out of an indifferent wilderness by sheer determination and the stubborn insistence that life, however difficult, however constrained, is worth preserving. The fire burns. The night passes. You sleep, and in sleeping, you survive. This is the culmination of every effort, the fruit of every carefully tended flame, every piece of wood gathered and stored, every seal checked and repaired, every small act of mutual care. You have made it through another day, and you are making it through another night, and when morning comes, you will rise and begin again, because that is what endurance means, not a single dramatic act of survival, but the quiet repetition of it, day after day, night after night, a lifetime measured in tended fires and shared warmth and the simple, profound decision to continue. Outside, in the vast Siberian darkness, temperatures plummet to depths that would kill exposed flesh in minutes. Trees split with sounds like gunshots. The earth itself seems to contract, pulling into itself against the cold. But inside this izba, inside this fragile shell of wood and faith and human determination, warmth persists. Life persists. And that persistence, that stubborn refusal to surrender to the cold and the dark and the seeming impossibility of it all, is its own form of triumph, quiet and uncelebrated but real nonetheless. You sleep on, trusting in the watch, trusting in the fire, trusting in the strength of walls and the skill of those who built them, trusting ultimately in the simple fact that others have survived nights like this before you and that you, too, can endure what must be endured. The night reaches its coldest point, hangs there for a time that could be minutes or hours, then slowly, imperceptibly, begins its long retreat toward dawn. You wake before dawn on a morning when the cold has changed, become something different, something you recognize from the whisper of memory that runs through your blood and bone. The air inside the izba carries a particular quality, a crystalline stillness that speaks of transformation happening beyond the walls, and you lie beneath the sheepskin for a long moment, listening to the breathing of the others, to the soft crackle of coals in the stove, to the silence that seems to hold within it the promise of something you have been waiting for without quite knowing you waited. The old woman is already moving, her footsteps soft against the earthen floor, and you watch through half-closed eyes as she wraps herself in her heaviest shawl and moves to the door. She opens it carefully, just a crack, and the light that spills inward is different now, no longer the blue-black of deep winter but tinged with something else, a softness at the edges, a suggestion of change. She stands there for a long moment, her face turned toward the opening, and when she closes the door again and turns back to the room, you see something in her expression that might be relief, or hope, or simply the quiet acknowledgement that you have survived another passage, that the worst has been endured and you remain. You rise and dress in the dim light, moving carefully to avoid disturbing those still sleeping. The household stirs gradually, each person emerging from their particular corner or shelf, and there is something different in the atmosphere this morning, a lightness in the movements, a quickness in the exchanges that suggests everyone feels what you feel, that subtle shift, that barely perceptible warming, that first whisper of the end of the deepest cold. It will still be winter for weeks, for months perhaps, but something has broken, some invisible barrier has been crossed, and the knowledge settles into your bones like warmth, like hope. The merchant sun is among the first to rise, and you see him move to the window, scraping away the thick frost to peer outside. He stands there for a long time, his breath fogging the small clear space he has made, and when he turns back to the room his face holds an expression you have not seen before, something open, something almost wondering. He catches your eye and nods, a small gesture that somehow contains within it an entire conversation, an acknowledgement of what has passed between all of you during these long months, of what has been shared and survived. You move through the morning tasks with a sense of purpose that feels renewed, cleaning out the stove with care, laying the new fire with attention to each small piece of kindling, each carefully chosen log. The old woman moves beside you, her hands sure and steady, and together you work in the companionable silence that has become a kind of language between you, a way of speaking that requires no words but carries everything that needs to be said. She hands you the poker and you tend the flames, watching them catch and grow, feeling the heat begin to radiate outward, and in this simple domestic ritual there is something profound, something that connects you to every person who has ever tended a fire through a winter night, who has ever kept the warmth alive when the cold pressed close. The morning meal is porridge again, the same grain you have eaten in various forms for months now, but today someone produces a small jar of preserved berries, saved for some special occasion that perhaps has finally arrived, and a spoonful is stirred into each bowl, turning the pale grain a soft rose color, adding a sweetness that tastes like celebration, like abundance, like spring even though spring is still distant. You eat slowly, savoring each bite, and around you the others do the same, faces softening, shoulders relaxing, and in this small luxury there is a recognition that you have earned this moment, that survival itself is worthy of marking. After the meal, several of the men prepare to go outside, bundling themselves against the cold but with less urgency than before, with a kind of confidence that comes from knowing the worst has passed. The young man who lost his fingers asks if you will come with them, and though part of you wants to remain in the warmth of the izba, another part knows that you need to see for yourself what has changed, to witness with your own eyes this transformation that everyone feels but has not yet been confirmed. You wrap yourself carefully, layer upon layer, each piece of clothing a familiar friend now, each wrapping a ritual performed with practiced efficiency. The old woman hands you an extra length of wool to wrap around your face, and her eyes meet yours with something that might be approval, or pride, or simply the acknowledgement that you have learned what you needed to learn, that you have become someone who knows how to protect themselves, how to survive. Outside, the cold still takes your breath, still stings your face where the skin is exposed, but it is different, less savage, less absolute. The sky above is a pale blue streaked with thin clouds, and the light that falls across the endless snow carries a quality you had almost forgotten, a brightness that suggests the sun, though still low on the horizon, has begun its slow return to warmth, to life. You stand with the others, faces turned upward, and for several minutes no one speaks, everyone simply absorbing this subtle but unmistakable shift, this first indication that the world has not frozen forever, that the cycle continues, that spring will come as it always has. The snow underfoot is still deep, still packed and hardened by months of cold, but near the walls of the buildings you can see places where it has begun to settle differently, to compress under its own weight in ways that speak of incremental warming, of the first invisible movements toward thaw. It will be a long time yet before the ground appears, before the ice breaks on the distant river, before green things push through the earth, but the process has begun, imperceptible to the eye but felt in the body, known in the bones. One of the older men points toward the forest edge, and following his gesture you see what he has noticed, tracks in the snow, fresh and clear, the marks of some animal moving through the night. For months the forest has seemed empty, lifeless, everything either dead or hidden so deep in sleep that it might as well be gone. But these tracks speak of wakening, of hunger stirring, of life that has waited in darkness beginning to move again. The men discuss the tracks quietly, debating what creature might have made them, whether it suggests opportunity for hunting or simply the first signs of the world's slow return to activity. You walk a short distance from the buildings, your feet crunching through the crusted snow, and the cold air fills your lungs with a clarity that feels cleansing, restorative. Behind you, the izba sits solid and sturdy, smoke rising straight from its chimney into the still air, and you feel a surge of something like affection for that humble structure, for the shelter it has provided, for the way its walls have held back the worst of winter's assault. It is not beautiful, this rough building of logs and mud and desperation, but it has been enough, and in this moment enough feels like abundance. The day progresses with a sense of purpose that has been missing during the darkest months. Inside the izba, people move with more energy, undertaking small repairs and improvements that were postponed during the worst of the cold. Someone mends the crack in one of the benches, someone else patches a thin spot in the felt that covers one section of wall. These are small tasks, almost insignificant, but they represent something important, a turning forward, a looking toward the future, a belief that there will be time ahead that matters, that requires preparation. You find yourself working alongside the merchant's son, helping him reinforce one of the sleeping shelves that has sagged under constant use. He works carefully, explaining what he is doing as he does it, and you realize that somewhere during these long months he has shed the last remnants of the person he was when he arrived, that well-dressed young man with soft hands and uncertain eyes. The person working beside you now moves with confidence, speaks with quiet authority, handles tools with the competence that comes from necessity transformed into skill. You mention this observation carefully, and he pauses in his work, considering. "I did not know who I was," he says after a moment, his voice low enough that only you can hear. "I thought I knew. I had plans, ambitions, a clear picture of the life I would lead. But that person, that version of myself, would not have survived this. Could not have." He drives a wooden peg into the joint he has been shaping, his movements precise. Perhaps that is the real gift of this winter. Not what we have learned about surviving cold, but what we have learned about surviving at all. His words settle into the space between you, and you continue working in silence for a while, each small action a meditation on what he has said. You think about who you were when winter began, about the person who walked into this cold season with certain assumptions, certain beliefs about what you could endure. That person seems distant now, almost imaginary, replaced by someone harder perhaps, but also deeper, more real, more completely present in each moment. The old woman calls everyone together in the early afternoon, and you gather around the table where she has laid out something you have not seen in weeks, fresh bread. Someone had been hoarding a bit of flour, saving it for this moment of turning, and the woman has used it to bake a small loaf, its crust golden brown, its smell filling the izba with an aroma that brings tears to several eyes. She cuts the bread with ceremony, each person receiving a piece no bigger than your fist, but the taste of it, the wheaten flavor, the slight chewiness of the interior, the crisp crust, seems impossibly luxurious after months of porridge and preserved foods. As you eat, the old woman begins to speak, her voice taking on the particular quality it holds when she is about to tell something important. She speaks of other winters she has survived, of years when the cold came even earlier and stayed even longer, of times when the food ran out and people survived on almost nothing, of seasons when sickness swept through communities and took the weak, the very young, the very old. She does not tell these stories to frighten but to contextualize, to place this winter within the larger pattern of winters survived by her family, her ancestors, the long line of people who have lived in this harsh climate and found ways to endure. "My grandmother told me," she says, her eyes distant with memory, "that the winter is a teacher. That it shows you what you are made of, what you can bear, what truly matters." She said that people who had never known real cold could be fooled by comfort, could mistake ease for strength, softness for wisdom. But winter strips all that away, leaves you with only what is essential, what is true. She pauses, looking around at the faces gathered in the dim light of the izba, and you see in her expression something fierce and proud. "You have learned well," she says simply. "All of you. You came here as strangers, as people from different worlds, different lives. But you leave, when you leave, as people who know something that cannot be taught any other way. You know what it is to depend completely on others, to be depended upon completely. You know what it means to tend a fire through a long night, to ration food when there is too little, to warm someone whose body has begun to fail. You know what is essential, what can be released, what must be held on to no matter what." The room is quiet when she finishes, each person absorbed in their own thoughts, their own accounting of what these months have meant, what they have cost, what they have given. You think of all the small moments that have accumulated into this present instant, the fear and the boredom and the cold, yes, but also the unexpected joys, the quiet satisfactions, the sense of community that formed in the darkness like a crystal forming in deep water, slowly, invisibly, but ultimately unbreakable. As evening approaches, you find yourself at the window again, scraping away frost to look out at the fading light. The sky is clear, the stars beginning to emerge with that particular brilliance they hold in cold air, and you can see the shapes of the buildings around you, the dark line of the forest beyond, all of it blue-shadowed and peaceful in the last light of day. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of sight, the rest of the world continues, cities and roads and all the complex machinery of human civilization. But here, in this moment, that world seems almost imaginary, a story someone once told you about a place that might or might not exist. What exists is this: the warmth at your back radiating from the stove, the murmur of voices as people settle into evening routines, the smell of wood smoke and human presence, and the slight mustiness of wool that has been worn too long without washing. What exists is the certain knowledge that when night comes you will have a place to sleep, that there will be enough warmth to survive the dark hours, that you are not alone in this endurance. It seems like so little, and it seems like everything. The young man who lost his fingers sits near the stove, his hands wrapped in clean cloth, and you see that the wounds have fully healed now, the stumps closed and sealed, the risk of infection past. He will carry those missing fingers for the rest of his life, a permanent reminder of this winter, of the price paid for a momentary lapse in attention, a few seconds of unprotected contact with metal in brutal cold. But you have watched him adapt over these weeks, learning to work with what remains, finding new ways to grip and hold and manipulate. The loss is real, but so is the resilience, the capacity of the human body and mind to adjust, to continue, to find ways forward even when something has been taken that cannot be restored. Dinner is the usual stew, but someone has added herbs to it today, some dried leaves saved from autumn, and the flavor is subtle but transformative, a reminder that food can be more than mere fuel, that even in hardship there is room for small graces, small pleasures. You eat slowly, making each bite last, and around you the others do the same, faces relaxed in the lamplight, bodies settling into the familiar ease of evening. After the meal, the merchant's son produces something from his pack, a small wooden flute that he has carried through all these months but never played. He explains that he learned to play as a child, that it was a skill his mother insisted on though his father thought it frivolous, impractical. He has not touched the instrument since entering the Izba, unsure if music belonged in this place of survival and hardship. But tonight, with the first hints of spring felt if not yet seen, with the worst behind and the future beginning to open again, he feels moved to play. He lifts the flute to his lips and begins, tentatively at first, the notes uncertain, his fingers rusty with disuse. But gradually the melody strengthens, becomes more sure, and the sound fills the Izba with something you had almost forgotten existed, beauty for its own sake, art with no purpose beyond the creation of something pleasing, something that touches the part of the human spirit that is not concerned with survival but with meaning, with expression, with the declaration that we are more than just bodies to be kept alive. The tune is simple, a folk melody that perhaps many in the room recognize, and you watch faces soften as they listen, eyes closing, heads tilting back, each person carried somewhere by the music, somewhere private and personal and far from this rough shelter in this frozen landscape. The old woman's lips move silently, perhaps singing words she learned long ago when she first heard this melody, and the young man with the bandaged hands sways slightly, his body responding to rhythm even though his fingers can no longer make such music themselves. When the song ends, the silence that follows is different from the usual silence of the Izba, deeper somehow, more resonant, filled with the echoes of what has just been shared. The merchant's son lowers the flute, his face flushed, his eyes bright, and someone begins to clap slowly, then others join, and the rough applause fills the space with warmth, with gratitude, with recognition that this moment matters, that it will be remembered. Play another, someone calls out, and he does, and then another, and the evening transforms into something none of you expected, a kind of celebration, a marking of survival that feels both solemn and joyful, both serious and playful. Between songs, people begin to talk more freely than they have in weeks, sharing stories from before the winter, from childhood or youth or distant places. The woman who rarely speaks tells of growing up on a farm far to the south, where winter was merely a season of cold rain rather than killing ice, where green things grew for most of the year. A young man describes the city where he worked before being sent east, its streets and markets and endless crowds, and though the description is simple, almost clumsy, it conjures a world that seems fantastical to you now, impossible and remote. You find yourself telling a story you had almost forgotten, something from your own childhood, a winter that seemed harsh at the time but that you now recognize as mild, a season when snow fell and children played in it and the cold was something that could be escaped by stepping indoors. You described the particular excitement of waking to find the world transformed by snow, the joy of that first venture outside, the stinging cold on your cheeks that seemed thrilling rather than threatening. As you speak, you realize that you are describing a different relationship with winter entirely, one where cold was a visitor rather than a siege, a temporary state rather than a test of survival. The others listen with faces that show both understanding and something like longing, for that innocence perhaps, for that time before they knew what cold could really mean. The evening lengthens, the lamp burning low, and gradually the gathering begins to settle, to quiet, to move toward sleep. The merchant's son puts away his flute carefully, wrapping it in cloth before returning it to his pack, and the gesture is tender, almost ceremonial. People drift to their sleeping places, wrapping themselves in familiar coverings, arranging themselves in positions that have become habit. But tonight there is something different in the atmosphere, something lighter, as if the music and the stories and the shared recognition of having survived has lifted some burden that everyone had been carrying without quite realizing its weight. You lie in your place beneath the sheepskin, your body slowly warming, your mind drifting between waking and sleep. Around you, the sounds of the izba at night are all familiar now, the soft breathing and occasional snore, the creak of the building settling, the gentle sound of coals shifting in the stove. These sounds that once seemed foreign, even frightening, now feel like a kind of lullaby, a reassurance of safety, of shelter maintained, of another night successfully reached. You think about the months that have passed, trying to calculate how long you have been here, but the days have blurred together into an indistinct mass of cold and dark and repetition. It might be January now, or early February, the deepest part of winter by the calendar, though the worst of the cold has begun to ease. Ahead lie weeks more of winter, perhaps months before true spring arrives, before the snow begins its slow retreat and the rivers break free of ice and the first green things push through the wet earth. But the knowledge that an end exists, that winter is not eternal, that survival is possible, this knowledge changes everything, makes the continuing hardship bearable in a way it was not before. In the darkness, you hear someone crying very softly, the sound almost inaudible but unmistakable. It is not the crying of pain or fear but of release, of tension held for too long finally let go, of emotions that could not be felt during the worst of things now permitted to surface. No one else seems to wake, or if they do they give no sign, allowing this person their private moment of grief or relief or whatever complex mixture of feelings is being released into the dark. You lie still, honoring that privacy, and think about all the small containers of emotion that each person here carries, all the losses and fears and hopes that have been set aside in the service of survival, of getting through one more day, one more night. The crying eventually stops, replaced by the steady breathing of sleep, and you find your own breath slowing, your thoughts becoming less distinct, more dreamlike. You drift through memories and imaginings, the face of someone you knew before this winter, a place you once lived, a meal you once ate, a day when you were warm. These images surface and dissolve without pattern or logic, and you let them come and go, not holding on to any particular thing, simply allowing your mind to wander where it will. You sleep and wake and sleep again, the night passing in its usual rhythm of hours marked only by the periodic addition of wood to the stove, by the slow wheel of stars beyond the frosted windows. Once, waking in deep darkness, you hear the wind beginning to rise outside, a sound that would have filled you with dread weeks ago but that now seems almost companionable, almost ordinary. The wind speaks of weather, of the atmosphere in motion, of the great systems that govern cold and warmth, storm and calm, the endless cycling of the world through its seasons. You are part of that cycle now in a way you were not before, not an observer from some protected distance but a participant, subject to the same forces that move through all living things in this harsh climate. Toward morning you fall into a deeper sleep, and in this sleep you dream vividly. You are walking through snow under a night sky brilliant with stars, and though the cold should be killing you, should be stopping your breath and freezing your blood, you feel perfectly comfortable, perfectly safe. Behind you, footprints mark your path, stretching back toward some origin you cannot see, and ahead the snow continues unmarked, waiting for your passage. In the dream, you understand that you are both walking towards something and away from something, that this journey has a purpose even if you cannot name it, cannot grasp it with the conscious mind. In the snow ahead, you see lights beginning to appear, not fires or lamps but lights that seem to come from within the snow itself, as if the frozen water holds some luminescence that is only visible at certain times, under certain conditions. These lights are beautiful and strange, and you walk toward them with a sense of anticipation, of homecoming, though you have never seen this place before, could never have imagined it. The lights grow brighter as you approach, and just as you reach them, just as you are about to understand what they are, what they mean, you wake. The Izba is gray with early morning light, that colorless illumination that comes before true dawn. Around you, people are beginning to stir, to emerge from sleep with the groans and sighs of bodies stiff from lying on hard surfaces in cold air. You rise carefully, your joints protesting, and move to help with the morning tasks, building up the fire, preparing for the day ahead. But part of your mind remains in the dream, caught by those strange lights in the snow, by the feeling of purpose and safety despite the surrounding cold. You cannot interpret the dream, do not try to fix any particular meaning to it, but you carry the feeling of it with you as you move through the morning routines, a sense of something significant having been communicated even if the message remains mysterious. The day unfolds with its familiar rhythm, the morning meal, the small tasks of maintenance and survival, the long hours of simply existing, simply continuing. But there is a difference now, a change in the quality of the time, as if each hour carries within it the knowledge of all the hours that have preceded it, all the nights endured and days survived. You are building towards something, moving through these final weeks of deep winter with a sense of approaching completion, of a chapter closing even as you remain fully present within its final pages. In the afternoon, the old woman beckons you to sit beside her near the stove, and when you settle there she reaches into her clothing and pulls out something small, wrapped in a bit of cloth. She unwraps it carefully, revealing a tiny carved figure, a bird in flight, its wings spread, its form smooth from years of handling. She places it in your palm, and you feel the warmth of the wood, the silky texture of its surface. "My husband made this," she says quietly, "many years ago, during a winter much like this one. He carved it from a piece of birch he found, working on it through the long evenings, giving it form a little at a time." She looks at the small bird resting in your hand, her eyes distant with memory. "He gave it to me when spring came, told me it represented everything we had survived, everything we had kept alive inside ourselves even when the outside world seemed dead. He said that knowing spring would come, truly knowing it, in your bones, in your heart, that knowledge was what allowed you to survive winter. Not just physically, but with your soul intact, with your hopes still living." She gently closes your fingers around the carving. "I want you to have this," she says. "Not as payment for anything, not as gift in the usual sense, but as a passing forward of something important, something that needs to continue." She meets your eyes directly, and in her gaze you see depths of experience, of survival, of wisdom earned through hardship. You understand now what this winter teaches. You have learned what my husband learned, what I learned, what every person who has truly endured these months learns. When you leave here, when you return to whatever life waits for you beyond this cold, you will carry that knowledge with you. And perhaps someday, when someone else faces their own winter, their own season of darkness and difficulty, you will be able to pass forward what you have learned, what you have been given. You hold the small carving carefully, feeling the weight of the gesture, the significance of what is being entrusted to you. The bird's form is simple but perfect, every curve and angle shaped with love and attention, with the kind of care that can only come from having endless time and limited material, from the need to create beauty in a place where beauty is scarce. You try to find words adequate to the moment, to what you are feeling, but everything seems insufficient, so you simply nod, closing your hand around the carving and holding it to your chest. The old woman pats your arm gently and rises, moving back to her work, and you sit for a long time with the small wooden bird pressed against your heart, feeling the presence of all the winters it has witnessed, all the springs it has survived to see. It is just a piece of carved wood, you tell yourself, just a simple object with no power beyond what you invest in it. But you know this is not quite true, that objects become vessels for memory and meaning, that they carry within them the intention and love and hope of those who made them, those who kept them, those who passed them forward. This small bird has survived storms and cold and years beyond counting, has been held by hands now gone to dust, has witnessed the full arc of lives lived in this harsh place. And now it has come to you, placing in your palm the weight of that continuity, that long chain of survival and endurance that stretches back through generations and forward toward futures you cannot see. The afternoon light slants through the small windows, illuminating dust motes that drift in the still air. The Izba feels suspended somehow, caught between seasons, between states of being, no longer the desperate shelter of deep winter but not yet the temporary station of spring. You all exist in this in-between space, this threshold time, waiting for the final transformation that will release you back into the world, back into movement and change and the next chapter of your lives. But for now, you remain here, in this rough building that smells of smoke and human presence and time compressed into close quarters. You remain in the rhythm of these days, in the particular intimacy that forms when people have seen each other at their most vulnerable, most reduced, most essentially human. Whatever comes after, whatever lives you return to, whatever paths you take when winter finally loosens its grip, you will carry this time with you, these people, these lessons learned in darkness and cold about what truly matters, what can be endured, what it means to survive not just with your body but with your humanity intact. The evening comes gently, the light fading through gradual stages rather than the abrupt darkening of the deepest winter. You move through the familiar routines with hands that know each task without thinking, with a body that has adapted to this life in ways you are only beginning to recognize. And as the lamp is lit and the darkness settles over the frozen land outside, you feel something like peace, something like contentment, even here in this hard place, even now in this difficult season. You have endured. You are enduring still. And that simple fact, the bare truth of your continued existence through these testing months, that fact alone is worth celebrating, worth honoring, worth carrying forward into whatever comes next. You wake before the sun, before the crow of any rooster, before even the first pale suggestion of dawn has touched the rim of the frozen world. The fire in the stove has burned down to embers again, as it always does in these final hours of night, and the air inside the Izba carries that particular quality of deep cold that settles when warmth has retreated into the walls themselves, waiting. You do not move immediately. You lie still beneath the weight of sheepskin and worn blankets, feeling the breath of your wife beside you, the smaller breaths of your children on the sleeping platform across the room, each one a reassurance, a small declaration against the silence. This is the rhythm you have known all winter, the pattern that repeats with the constancy of the stars themselves. Wake in darkness. Rebuild the fire. Move through the prescribed hours. Sleep when exhaustion permits. Wake again. The cycle does not change, but you have changed within it, shaped by these months of cold into something harder and more essential, stripped of everything that is not necessary for continuation. Outside, the wind has finally ceased. You heard it die sometime in the night, its voice fading from howl to whisper to nothing, leaving behind a stillness so complete it seems almost to hum with its own presence. You rise carefully, wrapping the blanket around your shoulders, and move to the small window. The shutter is frozen shut from the inside, ice crystals spreading across the wood in patterns that resemble ferns or feathers or the delicate architecture of something alive. You press your palm against it and feel the absolute cold radiating through, a cold so deep it seems to come not from the air outside but from some more fundamental source, the cold of space itself, of the void between stars. When you finally work the shutter open, just a crack, the world that greets you is transformed. The storm has passed completely, and in its wake the sky stretches clear and vast, still dark but beginning to pale at the eastern edge. The snow lies undisturbed in every direction, smooth and perfect, erasing all the small marks of human presence, the path to the barn, the outline of the woodpile, the depression where you dug down to the root cellar. Everything is covered, everything made new and strange and somehow more silent than silence itself. The stars are fading now, withdrawing into the coming light, but for this moment they still burn with that cold brilliance that belongs only to winter nights in this latitude. You recognize the patterns your father taught you: the Great Bear, the Little Bear, the Pleiades clustered like a handful of ice chips scattered across dark cloth. These same stars look down on your grandfather, on his grandfather, on all the generations that learned to endure these winters, to carve out life in the margins of survival. You close the shutter and turn back to the stove, to the work of coaxing flame from embers. The kindling catches quickly today, the wood is dry, properly stored, the result of summer labor that pays its dividend now in these dark hours. The small flames grow, and you feed them carefully, adding slightly larger pieces, watching the fire establish itself, feeling the first suggestion of warmth beginning to radiate outward. This simple act, performed countless times, has become a meditation, a ritual that marks the boundary between night and day, between the realm of sleep and the realm of wakefulness. Your wife stirs as the warmth begins to spread. You hear her breathing change, feel the shift as she draws the blankets closer around herself before rising. Neither of you speaks. There is no need. The morning routine unfolds with the practiced coordination of people who have shared a small space through a long winter, who have learned to move around each other efficiently, to conserve words for when they carry actual meaning. She begins preparing the morning kasha while you dress more fully, adding the layers that will allow you to step outside. The felt boots, the sheepskin coat, the mittens your grandmother made before her hands became too stiff for such fine work. The hat with ear flaps that ties beneath your chin. Each piece of clothing is essential, irreplaceable, maintained with the same careful attention you give to tools or to the animals themselves. Before you go out, you eat a small portion of the kasha, grateful for its warmth, for the weight of it in your stomach. Your wife has added a precious spoonful of butter today, a small celebration of the storm's passing, of your survival through another night of exceptional cold. The children are waking now, and you pause to look at them, your son, nearly 7, already learning to rise before full light, to understand the demands of winter mornings, your daughter, 4, still small enough to remain in the warmth a little longer, and the baby, swaddled and drowsy, knowing nothing yet of the world beyond warmth and milk and the sound of familiar voices. This is what you protect. This is what makes the cold endurable, what transforms mere survival into something that carries meaning beyond the simple continuation of breath and heartbeat. The door opens with difficulty, snow has drifted against it during the night, and you step out into the transformed world. The cold strikes immediately, a physical presence that finds every gap in your clothing, every exposed moment of skin. You can see your breath crystallizing in the air before your face, each exhalation becoming briefly visible before dispersing. The snow beneath your feet squeaks with each step, that particular sound that comes only when the temperature has dropped far below freezing, when the crystals are so cold and hard they compress and shatter with a high, almost musical note. The sky is lightening steadily now, though the sun has not yet appeared. The eastern horizon glows with the promise of dawn, that peculiar intensity of color that comes before the sun itself, deep blue fading to pale turquoise, then to a band of yellow gold that spreads and brightens. The snow catches this light and seems to glow from within, luminous and faintly blue, stretching away in all directions to the line of dark forest that marks the boundary of the cleared land. The barn stands solid and dark against this brightness, and you make your way toward it, following a path you know more by memory than by sight, since all the familiar markers are buried. The chickens must be tended first. They are fragile creatures, poorly suited to this climate, and they depend entirely on your intervention for their survival. Then the pig, then the cow and her calf. Each animal represents wealth, security, the difference between a winter with enough to eat and a winter of true hunger. Inside the barn, the animals have generated their own warmth, their breath and bodies creating a microclimate that, while far from comfortable, is survivable. The cow turns her large head toward you as you enter, her eyes reflecting the small flame of the lamp you have brought. She makes a low sound, not quite contentment, not quite complaint, a simple acknowledgement of your presence. You speak to her softly as you begin the work of milking, your hands remembering the rhythm, the pressure, the steady stream into the wooden pail. This milk, still warm from the cow's body, steaming slightly in the cold air of the barn, represents a kind of miracle. That life continues to generate such richness even in the heart of winter, that the careful stewardship of summer and autumn, the hay stored, the grain saved, the shelter maintained, pays this daily dividend. You drink a mouthful directly from the pail, feeling the warmth spread through you, tasting the sweetness that will fade as the milk cools. When the barn work is finished and you return to the izba, the sun has risen. It hangs low on the southern horizon, as it does throughout these winter months, casting long shadows across the snow, illuminating the ice crystals so that the entire landscape seems to sparkle. The light is thin and pale, offering no warmth, but after the darkness of the storm it feels like abundance, like a gift freely given. Your neighbors are emerging now from their own izbas. You can see smoke rising from chimneys up and down the scattered settlement, each column straight and white in the still air. Someone is making their way toward the well in the center of the communal space, carrying buckets. The world is resuming its ordinary patterns, the patterns that were briefly suspended by the storm's intensity. Later, when the sun has climbed as high as it will go, still barely above the horizon, even at midday, you walk with your son to check the trapline at the forest edge. This is part of his education, learning to read the signs that indicate where small animals move, how to set a snare that kills quickly and does not damage the pelt, how to walk through deep snow without exhausting yourself. He is quiet and attentive, watching everything, occasionally asking questions that show he is beginning to understand the deeper patterns, the way knowledge of this place must be built layer upon layer, season upon season. You find one trap has been successful, a white hare, its winter coat perfect camouflage against the snow, frozen now in death. Your son helps you reset the trap, his small hands clumsy in the thick mittens but growing more capable with each attempt. You show him again how to disguise the human scent, how to place the snare at exactly the right height, how to use the natural pathways that animals follow even under snow. Walking back toward the izba, the hair slung over your shoulder, you feel the particular satisfaction that comes from adding to the household's resources, from providing. The pelt will be scraped and dried and eventually sold or traded. The meat will supplement the kasha and bread, will add richness to the thin soup that sustains you through these months. Nothing is wasted. Everything has value. The days that follow the storm settle into a pattern of exceptional clarity and exceptional cold. The sky remains cloudless, that deep blue that seems almost black at the zenith, fading to pale at the horizon. The nights are brilliant with stars and moon, the air so clear that distances become deceptive, the forest seeming sometimes close enough to touch, at other times impossibly remote. The cold deepens further, reaching temperatures that make even the briefest exposure dangerous, that turn spit to ice before it reaches the ground, that cause trees in the forest to crack with sounds like musket shots as the sap freezes and expands. You venture outside only when necessary, accomplishing all tasks as quickly as possible before retreating again to the shelter of the izba. The woodpile diminishes steadily, you are burning more than usual to maintain even minimal warmth, and you begin to calculate whether the supply will last until spring. It should. It must. But the margin is narrower than you would prefer, and you make a mental note that next summer the woodpile must be larger still, that you can never have too much fuel laid by against the winter's demands. Inside, the family draws closer together, both literally and in the less tangible ways that matter. Your wife tells the children the old stories, the ones about Baba Yaga and the Firebird and the Snow Maiden, her voice low and rhythmic in the dim light. Your daughter listens with wide eyes, interrupting occasionally with questions. Your son pretends he is too old for such tales, but you notice how still he becomes, how attentively he listens. Even the baby seems to quiet when the storytelling begins, as if some part of her understands that these narratives carry weight, that they are not mere entertainment but transmissions of something essential, the encoding of wisdom and warning in forms that memory can hold. You work on small tasks, mending harness, sharpening tools, splicing rope. Your hands stay busy while your mind drifts, moving between memory and anticipation, between the weight of all the winters you have survived and the thought of the spring that will eventually come. It always comes. Even when the cold seems eternal, even when the sun at midday barely clears the horizon, even when the night stretches for 18 hours and the darkness feels like a physical presence, even then, the earth continues its ancient rotation, the tilt that brings the seasons, the cycle that no human power can alter or halt. One night, perhaps a week after the storm, you wake to find your son standing at the window, the shutter open slightly, his face pressed close to the gap. You rise quietly and move beside him, placing your hand on his thin shoulder. Together you look out at the moonlit world, the snow glowing with that peculiar luminescence that seems to come from within, the shadows of the buildings stark and precise on the white ground. "Is it always like this?" he asks, his voice barely above a whisper. "The winter?" you ask. He nods. "Yes," you tell him. "And no. Each winter is cold. Each winter is hard. But each one is also different. Some are deeper. Some longer. Some bring storms that last for days. Some are clear and still like this. But all of them end. Remember that. No matter how long or dark or cold the winter becomes, it always ends." He is quiet for a moment, considering this. Then he asks, "Were you afraid? When the storm came?" You think about this, about how to answer honestly without burdening him with the full weight of adult fear. "I was careful," you say finally. Fear can be useful if it makes you prepare, if it keeps you from being careless. But once the storm is here, fear does nothing. Then you simply do what must be done. He seems satisfied with this answer, or at least willing to accept it for now. Together you stand at the window a moment longer, looking out at the frozen world, before you guide him back to the warmth of the sleeping platform, back under the blankets where his sisters sleep undisturbed. The winter continues, but something has shifted. The depth of the cold begins, almost imperceptibly, to moderate. The days grow longer, each one adding a minute or two of light. The sun climbs fractionally higher at midday. These changes are so gradual that you might doubt them if you did not know to look for them, if generations of experience had not taught you to read the subtle signs that indicate the seasons turning. In the village, people emerge more readily from their homes. Conversations happen in the communal spaces again, voices carrying across the snow. Someone has spotted a raven, the first in weeks, and this is discussed with the gravity such news deserves. Ravens follow the wolves, and wolves mean the forest is alive, means the wild world continues despite the cold's best efforts to still it. You and several of the other men begin to discuss the work that will need to be done when the thaw comes. Fields must be prepared, seeds sorted and blessed, tools inspected and repaired. The list is long and familiar, the same tasks that follow every winter, but speaking of them now, while snow still lies deep and the nights are still long, is a way of claiming the future, of declaring that you will be there to do this work, that the winter has not defeated you. Your wife begins to plan as well, thinking ahead to the kitchen garden she will plant close to the izba, the herbs and vegetables that will supplement the summer diet, that will need to be preserved for the following winter. She inventories what remains of the stored food, calculating portions, making adjustments. There is enough. There will be enough. The margin is not large, but it rarely is. You have always lived close to the edge, understanding that security is not the absence of risk but the knowledge that you can meet what comes, that you have the skills and the strength and the will to endure. One evening, as you sit together after the children have gone to sleep, your wife speaks quietly about the baby, about how strong she has grown through the winter, how her grip has become firm and her eyes focus with increasing awareness. There was fear at the beginning, unspoken but shared, that a baby born so close to winter might not survive it. Many do not. But this one has thrived as well as any child can in these conditions, and you feel a tentative gratitude, a careful hope that by summer she will be robust enough to weather the next winter with greater ease. We have been lucky, your wife says, and you nod, though luck is too simple a word for the complex mixture of preparation, vigilance, accumulated wisdom, and sheer stubborn refusal to yield that has brought you through. But you understand what she means, that beyond all human effort there remains an element of grace, of conditions that might have been worse and were not, of a winter that, while hard, was survivable. The moon waxes and wanes, waxes again. You mark time by its cycles, by the slow accumulation of days. The woodpile shrinks but does not run out. The stored grain diminishes but remains sufficient. The cow continues to give milk, less than in summer but enough. The chickens lay fewer eggs but do not stop entirely. Everything holds, everything sustains. And then one morning you wake to the sound of dripping. It is so unexpected that at first you cannot identify it, your mind reaching for explanations. But when you rise and look out, you see that the temperature has risen just enough, just barely enough, for the ice on the eaves to begin melting in the midday sun. The sound you hear is water dripping from the roof, falling onto the snow below, each drop a small declaration, a tiny erosion of winter's hold. It is not spring. Not yet. There will be more cold, more storms, more nights when the temperature plunges and the world freezes solid once again. But the balance has shifted. Winter is no longer advancing but holding its ground, and soon, perhaps in a week or in a month, it will begin its slow retreat. You stand at the door of the izba, wrapped in your sheepskin, and look out at the landscape you have inhabited for these long months. The snow is still deep, the air still cold enough to hurt your lungs, the nights still long. But the light has changed. The angle of the sun, even weak and pale as it is, carries a different quality now, a suggestion of the warmth that will eventually return, of the green world that lies dormant beneath the snow, waiting. Your son comes to stand beside you, mimicking your posture, looking out at the same view. You place your hand on his shoulder, feeling the slight frame that will, in time, grow strong enough to bear the work that will be his, the responsibility that passes from father to son in an unbroken line stretching back beyond memory. We made it through, he says, and there is a note of wonder in his voice, as if he is only now beginning to understand what that means, what was required, what was endured. We made it through, you confirm. We always do. This is not strictly true. Some do not make it through, some winters claim their toll in lives as well as in comfort and ease, but it is true enough, true in the way that matters for him now, at this age, learning to trust in his own strength and in the accumulated wisdom of the community around him. The day unfolds in its ordinary patterns, the now familiar rhythm of winter tasks. But something has lifted. You notice it in the way your wife hums quietly as she works, in how your daughter plays with slightly more energy, in the way conversations with neighbors linger a bit longer, include more laughter. Everyone feels it, this imperceptible but certain shift, this sense that the deepest cold has passed, that what remains is simply endurance of a kind you have already proven you possess. In the late afternoon, you walk out beyond the buildings to a small rise that gives a view across the valley. The sun is lowering toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink and pale orange. The forest stands dark against this brightness, the individual trees distinguishable now in the clear air, their branches bare and stark. Smoke rises from the chimneys of the village, and you can see small figures moving between the buildings, going about the eternal work of maintaining life in this harsh place. You think about all the people who have stood on this rise or one like it, looking out at a similar scene, your father, your grandfather, generations reaching back to the first settlers who carved these farms from the wilderness, who chose to stay despite the hardness, despite the cold, despite everything that counseled departure. They stayed because this was their place, because the land yielded enough to sustain life if you knew how to work it, because the community that formed here became itself a kind of wealth, a resource that could not be easily abandoned. And you have stayed for the same reasons, and your children will likely stay, and their children after them. The winters will come, each one a test and a trial, and they will be endured because that is what people do, what you have always done. You adapt. You prepare. You help one another. You hold on through the deepest cold and the longest darkness, trusting that spring will come because it always has, because the earth turns and the seasons change and the cycle continues regardless of human suffering or human will. As the sun touches the horizon, you turn back toward the izba. Smoke rises from its chimney, and through the small window you can see the warm glow of lamplight. Inside, your family waits, your wife preparing the evening meal, your children occupied with their small concerns, the baby sleeping in her cradle. This is what you return to, what gives meaning to the endurance, what transforms survival from mere biological imperative into something that approaches grace. The door opens to your touch, and the warmth flows out to meet you. You step inside, stamp the snow from your boots, unwrap the layers of clothing that have kept you alive in the cold. Your wife looks up and smiles, and your daughter runs to embrace your legs, and your son glances over with that particular expression of contentment that children wear when their world feels secure. You move to the stove and hold your hands toward the warmth, feeling sensation return to your fingers. The fire burns steadily, fed with wood you cut and split last summer, before these concerns existed, when the work was simply preparation for an abstract future that has now become the present, that will soon become the past. Another winter survived, another story to tell. Outside, the night gathers, and the temperature will drop again, and the stars will emerge in their cold brilliance. But inside this small space, life continues in its humble, essential patterns. Food and warmth and the presence of loved ones. Work and rest and the slow passage of days. Stories told and lessons learned and small kindnesses exchanged. This is how you endure the Siberian winter nights. Not through any single act of heroism, not through dramatic gestures or exceptional courage, but through the steady accumulation of small choices, repeated day after day, night after night. Through preparation and vigilance and the refusal to yield to despair. Through community and cooperation and the knowledge, passed down through generations, of how to wrest life from a landscape that seems determined to deny it. The winter is not over, not quite, but its worst has passed. What remains is simply time, the slow retreat of cold and darkness, the gradual return of warmth and light. You will mark each day, grateful for its passage, watchful for the signs of spring. And when at last the snow melts and the ice breaks and the first green shoots push up through the dark earth, you will greet them with the particular joy of people who have earned the season, who have paid the price of winter and emerged on the other side, intact and alive and ready to begin again. For now, though, there is this evening, this moment, this fire burning against the dark. There is kasha in the pot and milk in the jug and bread from grain you harvested months ago. There are children sleeping safely and a wife who shares the burden and the hope. There is a roof that does not leak and walls that keep the wind at bay and a stove that transforms last summer's labor into tonight's warmth. You sit down at the rough table, and your family gathers around you. For a moment before the meal begins, you pause, looking at each face in the lamplight, feeling the weight of what has been preserved, what has been protected through these long months. Then your wife serves the food, and you eat together in comfortable quiet, the small sounds of spoons on bowls, of breathing, of the fire settling in the stove. Outside, the world freezes and thaws and freezes again. Inside, life persists, warm and fragile and stubbornly ongoing. This is the victory, small and daily and profound. This is how the winter is endured and overcome, not once but again and again, year after year, generation after generation, for as long as people choose to make their lives in this unforgiving place. The lamp burns low, its oil nearly spent, casting long shadows across the walls. Soon you will bank the fire and retire to the sleeping platform, pull the blankets close, and surrender to the deep sleep of physical exhaustion. And tomorrow you will wake before dawn and begin again, the same tasks, the same rhythms, carrying forward until the day when suddenly you will notice that the cold has truly broken, that the sun has real warmth again, that the world is returning to life. But that day is not yet here. For now, there is only this night and the ones that follow, each one survived, adding to the total that will eventually equal a winter endured, a season conquered, a year that will join all the others in memory, growing distant and softened by time until what remains is not the hardship but the fact of survival, the simple truth that you lived through it and emerged on the other side, ready for whatever comes next. The baby makes a small sound in her sleep, and your wife rises to check on her, adjusting the swaddling, murmuring soft reassurances. Your son yawns hugely, fighting the sleep that pulls at him. Your daughter has already surrendered, her head resting on the table, her breathing slow and even. You bank the fire, damping it so it will burn slowly through the night, conserving fuel while maintaining enough heat to keep the cold from invading completely. The routine is automatic now, your hands moving with the certainty of long practice. When it is done, you turn to gather your daughter, to carry her to bed, to tuck the blankets around her small form. One by one, your family settles into sleep. The izba grows quiet except for the small sounds of night, the tick of cooling wood, the whisper of breath, the occasional pop from the stove. The lamp gutters and goes out, and darkness fills the space, complete and enveloping. But it is not the darkness of the storm, not the oppressive weight of the deepest winter night. It is simply the ordinary darkness of a house at rest, of people sleeping safely, of life suspended until morning brings its call to resume. There is peace in it, and acceptance, and the profound relief that comes from knowing you have, once again, done what needed to be done, that those you love are warm and fed and protected as well as you are able to protect them. And so the night passes, and morning will come, and the work will continue, and the days will accumulate, and spring will arrive because it always does, and you will be there to meet it, weathered and tired but unbroken, ready to turn your hand to the next season's demands, carrying forward the knowledge that if you survived this winter, you can survive the next, and the one after that, for as long as survival is required. This is the story that repeats across the scattered settlements of Siberia, in 1,000 izbas much like yours, where 1,000 families much like your own make their stand against the cold and the dark. Each one separate, each one alone in their small island of warmth, but all connected by the shared experience of endurance, by the common knowledge of what it means to stake your life on the land's grudging generosity, to extract existence from conditions that seem designed to deny it. The night deepens and then begins, imperceptibly, to pale. The stars fade. The darkness softens to gray. And at last the sun returns, rising into a clear sky, casting its thin light across the frozen world, illuminating the snow that will, eventually, inevitably, melt and give way to the black earth beneath, to the seeds that will be planted, to the green shoots that will rise, to the cycle that continues, season after season, year after year, binding the living to the land and to one another in ways that cannot be easily severed or denied. You are part of this cycle, woven into it by birth and choice and the accumulated weight of all the winters you have survived. And as you sleep now, in these final hours before dawn, you carry within you the knowledge that you will wake and rise and continue, because that is what people do, what you have always done, what your children will learn to do by watching you, by living through their own winters, by discovering in themselves the same stubborn capacity for endurance that has brought your family and your people through countless seasons of cold and darkness. The winter is not over, but its end is coming. And you will be there to see it, to feel the first true warmth on your face, to hear the ice breaking in the stream, to watch the snow retreating up the mountainsides, revealing the brown earth, the first flowers, the returning birds. You will be there because you held on through the darkness, because you did not yield, because survival is not a single dramatic act but a long series of small decisions, repeated faithfully, carried out with care and attention and the support of those around you. This is how the Russian serfs endured the Siberian winter nights, not through miracles or magic, but through work and wisdom and the fierce determination to persist, to protect what mattered, to wake each morning and begin again. And in this endurance, repeated across generations, across centuries, there is a kind of victory that needs no proclamation, that speaks in the simple fact of continuation, of life maintained against the odds, of warmth carved from the heart of cold, of light kindled in the depths of darkness. The story ends as it must, with the promise of morning, with the certainty of return, with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have done this before and will do it again, for as long as the earth turns and the seasons change and there are people stubborn enough to make their home in this beautiful, terrible place. The night releases its hold, the cold retreats by degrees, and what remains is you and your family and the small bright space you have defended through the long winter, ready now to greet whatever comes next, carrying forward into another day, another season, another year of this life you have chosen to live, here at the edge of the world, where survival itself is triumph enough.